Our meeting and open it up with any public comments. Anybody online? Yeah. Yep. And we'll go into the discussion. Before we go into the discussion on 5, I just wanted to let you all know what's going on with demolition on 910. We had our initial meeting. We had a follow-up meeting and a walk around with a bunch of interested parties. And so that's kind of distilled down now to a subcommittee. And the subcommittee will probably stay intact probably for a while. I think we'll be writing, I'm going to try and come up with a draft with Bill for our next plan subcommittee meeting, which is, I think, another week.
Yeah.
And members of the subcommittee are Bill and myself from the Planning Commission, Michael from the Historic Review Board, Dick Stewart, with his interests in development of that area that he's working with this arts district. And then representatives from HRB or HBF, 2 of them, of course, are Kurt and staff. By leaving anybody else out.
Vice Chairman.
Yeah. But anyhow, so we've been having in-depth discussions about why you can and cannot do demolition and or restoration in that area. And I think in my mind, the bottom line is going to come up. We've already redesignated one contributing structure, maybe 2, into non-contributing structures. So HBF is at least moving and listening to things. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to what are the resources that are available to do any of the renovations at all. And what participation is the city willing to play in this whole thing? And that's, I think that's a real big question there from a funding standpoint. So what's difficult is to write the code saying that it's a contributing structure and it has to be renovated when there aren't sources to do that renovation. And then we get into what we've gotten into thus far for the last number of years, and where the building just continues to go into deterioration.
So when you said, you've been talking about why you can't do renovation, they talk about like financial and other barriers to renovations in the area? Okay.
Yes, yeah. And so that complicates the whole thing. What I'd like Bill and I to focus on is the black and white of it. And the black and white's going to come down to, yes, you have to do something. No, you don't have to. Yeah, it can be, the property can be sold and demolished. Or if we don't want to let them do that, what is the sunset for them, and or maybe the sunset for the city in making those determinations? I don't know. So that's kind of where we are right now. It's kind of convoluted and very complicated, but the bottom line at the end of the day, and in my opinion, in Nye County, it's gonna be, what is the city willing to do or not do?
I feel like one question along those lines. Have you guys talked about sources of funding?
Yes.
Or, I mean, is there anybody besides the city that they can ask for money?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
there's a number of potential resources. And there's a number of different options of them turning the property over to a program like Dick Stewart's, where it becomes a rental. And then they get a portion of that rent to offset the property.
Dick seems to have a pretty deep knowledge of the funding issues and spent a lot of time talking about those and opportunities. And so, I mean, it's nice that he brought it, shared it with everybody.
Yeah,
Well, it's encouraging to hear that it's not all, you know, the city of nothing. Yeah.
I mean, it might be pie in the sky, but I mean, he identified actual
well,
potential sources under what, and under what circumstances.
but
Is there grant money available?
There's grant. yeah, the problem is that grant money is anything to do with a government grant means the whole building has to be brought up to code. And that becomes a problem. Because then you're talking about a lot of money, and the grants don't really have a lot of money like that. So there's.
But if you
there's-
remodel a house or you rebuild a house, you still have to build it to code.
Yes,
Whatever they, you know, with or without grant money, a house has to be.
yeah, but that's your money.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
historic buildings have an exemption.
They what?
A contributing historic building,
Yeah,
it has an exemption.
it has an exemption for what?
The building code, you don't have to bring it up to code.
Oh, you don't have to wait.
There's no like minimum standard?
Registered landmark building, you don't have.
Well,
There's some standard, but you don't have to bring it up.
well, you can't, for example, take the crumbling old steps down and build the new steps, not to code.
Yeah.
Right, you know, that kind
I mean, it acknowledges that.
of, yeah.
There's some basic, I mean, there's basic safety issues that are.
Yeah, sure. We can ask.
anything else you want to add to that, Kurt?
Just two other things, from Murphy's, comments from, I think, yesterday, we sent, have a copy. Everybody has a copy at their desk, and yes, we sent that to you. You know, some, just suggested edits, that tree section, and also, one thing that's come up is, chapter 8. There was a, desire to, maybe make some changes and some wetland protection, so I've stormwater changes, so I've done a draft of that. And I would prefer to change that today, but I just want to make that clear. Wanted to give that to everybody. Purpose of this is there's been some federal changes with wetlands, the Supreme Court case of reduced wetlands and so protections, and so in other communities around here have strengthened our local codes, and so this would be strengthening our code to protect wetlands, and then also bringing our code up to the current stormwater standards. There's a lot of stormwater exemptions in here. We've been using the local requirements, the city, Port Royal, Hilton Head, Bluffton. County created 2020 with the loco, like southern or country, like regional governments or whatever. Our current code does not have that, and so this would be updating that as well. To it, so just passing that on. I think that was kind of identified as something we should be looking at.
Could you give a quick summary on what the changes are?
Sure, so, the first would be getting rid of the current stormwater standards, which are not very, what's the best word? Much like our discussion with chapter 7 and 9, there's not a lot of standards there to review stormwater. There's a lot of exemptions for stormwater, strangely. And so, since we've adopted so local, we're moving so standard adding the wetland protection to the manual to kind of better protect the wetlands. Based on, basically making greater wetland buffer for all properties and setback, and then not allowing things within the wetland. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Right now,
there's no buffer.
There's a critical area line, but there's not really a buffer per se, and so, that would be the biggest thing in allowing us to like inspect and have violations. And then the final thing is I got into chapter 8, and this was kind of brought up because Bluffton just adopted their code. And this final thing with this is this would preempt any supersede any development agreement. I think this is really the most important thing. Because it's considered important health and safety. If you've read the paper, we have a lot of development agreement properties that are attempting to develop with stormwater standards under like 19 or 2000, like stormwater standard instead of the current ones. And that's really codify this to say they'd have to bring it into the current SOLOCO requirements. If you were going to develop a development agreement.
Is that something Bluffton did?
A month ago.
And did they get a legal opinion about that?
Yeah, I mean, our attorney did it, and our attorney has looked at it already.
And he says that's okay?
Why, if that's true, why couldn't we do the same with respect to trees and some other issues?
That's a good question that we can maybe ask maybe that could be like a recommendation or something.
I've just found it amazing that I've dealt a lot with the issues of vested rights in my practice and have litigated these issues and argued them. And I've never seen one without reasonable sunsets on them. And from what I'm understanding, from what you've told me, is these either have no sunsets at all, or, they're so far out, it's crazy. So, and I mean, because usually the idea is you have to do something, building permit, or what I call building permit plus, building permit plus clearing and grading. Usually you have to go vertical within a particular period of time on some percentage of the project to vest your rights, but have to be allowed to do nothing over decades. It just flies in the face of everything I've ever known about land use regulation.
And so I would say if Bluffton's able to do it, since over 90% of their development is in a development agreement, right? 90% of the development that's occurring in Bluffton and still is occurring is in a development agreement. Or one of the two, so they're doing it, I think we feel like.
You should ask the attorney to look into the whole thing.
So, yeah, I think if you want to make that recommendation, we can maybe you may add this to what you approve, or maybe recommend for chapter 5. And then when I was getting into chapter 8, I've never really looked at it, but we're allowing like wind turbines in a lot of districts. I just didn't think anybody would really want wind turbines next to their house anywhere. So I just deleted that whole thing. I don't think that's really appropriate for the city, so, but we can talk about that later. I'm just adding it because it was identified. The Bluffton did it the last like month and a half, and the administration thought this would be a good idea with our development process.
So this does reflect what Bluffton did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that where most of these changes came from?
I noticed in here, I just thumbing through it real quick, that it's references to SOLOCO standards. Are the SOLOCO standards actually written in here too?
No, we would just reference it, so, so local standards are few and big. So it'd be just. We have to talk to him how we would want to adopt that, if this would be good enough, just referencing it, and then we adopt that by reference. It's a formal thing with chapter 8.
Okay.
Which is pretty commonly done.
And that, but the attorneys looked at the SOLOCO standard.
Oh, they look
As
at
well as
the standards that we're talking about.
But we can look at this, we don't have to do something.
This is a draft, so
Yeah, I'd like to look at it.
it came up, so it's not on your agenda, it's for your information, and we can talk about it later.
I think we ought to at least get a copy of the SOLOCO standards in our office. maybe
I have to
not,
look for another. They're very
Maybe not.
technical.
publish it for everybody if we don't need to, but at least have the standards available to us.
And I would request if there's a written legal opinion, City of Bluffton, that we actually get a copy of it, as opposed to just hear that they have it.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Well, and I just, wanted to list your information and we're just gonna add this, I think, to the next month or two. Code changes, because it seems like it's important to do this as soon as possible because of, some of these development agreement properties.
Okay, so let's move on to our agenda of chapter 5. We're getting close to wrapping it up. I would like to go back and ask a question about some of the things that we have redlined here. 564 parking space requirements.
Adrian,
39. 39 of 60.
Come back to some of the other pages too.
Yeah,
Okay, we don't go again.
I was just looking at the chart and I see where we've taken out a large portion of the chart and left it simplified at 1 per 400 gross square feet for drive-through facilities, restaurants, cafes, coffee houses, gas stations, food stations, et cetera, et cetera. And I know we had a lot of discussion, I just can't remember, because our discussion before was, making sure that there was parking spaces for the employees, and then additional spaces for other standards, depending on the kind of facility it was. And we deleted all that and went down to 1 to 400 square feet. I just wondered,
Right.
is that what everybody's?
No, we had, Benji, I think you had some suggestions of when it comes to the chart. If you look at the residential category, single family and short-term rental, the first one. The suggestion was to go down to 1 per unit. And then also under the 2 and 3 family, multifamily and accessory units, to take out the accessory units. To actually include accessory dwelling units, ADUs, into the dwelling units located within mixed-use buildings, so no spaces would be required for ADUs. And then to downgrade the requirement for the 2-bedroom multifamily units from 1.75 currently to 1 was the suggestion, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So what I did, and this should be included in the packet. I went back to the American Planning Associations, they have a planning advisory service, they bring out these booklets on different planning aspects. So one of them is called parking standards. I went back and took a look at different categories, for instance, under residential. Should be actually enclosed in your packet too.
Don't. Good ones.
The last page.
It's the last,
Oh.
it's the very last page. So I went into this parking standards and it has a lot of parking standards from all different municipalities, jurisdictions within the United States. So if you look into single family and short-term rental, that category that we have, there are different standards. For instance, it starts with 1 per dwelling unit. You can kind of differentiate it by, let's say, floor area, the floor space of the actual dwelling unit. Or what also some jurisdictions have done is to create categories of lot sizes. So for instance, Jefferson County, Kentucky actually went forward and did 3 categories. So located on a lot greater than 6,000, then between 6,000 square feet and 20,000, anything greater than 20,000. They had a minimum and they had a maximum of what you could provide on lot for parking, right? I mean, there are different approaches, but basically, in a nutshell, I have not found anything below 1 for single family. We have 2 at the moment, so that's kind of actually a good approach. It's kind of a medium approach when it comes to parking standards throughout the nation. The ADUs, I have not seen anything. I do have to say this is not the most, it's not the latest standard, but I have not found anything for ADUs with no parking standards at all. And regarding multifamily, I've kind of congregated it into different aspects. So starting with like a multifamily residential dwelling unit, starting from a studio efficiency, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedrooms. The 1.75 that we currently have for 2 bedroom units is actually a pretty decent standard. I mean, a lot of other places have at least 1.5. Some have even 2, like St. Mary's County, Maryland has 2 spaces for a 2 bedroom multifamily unit, plus 1 guest parking space for every 2. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with you to kind of show you what other places within the United States have as their parking standards. And looking at our parking standards, we kind of felt we were in pretty good line what we currently have in place. But that's just something that we've done in the background as a research to provide you with, but Benji, if you
Yeah, so are these track setbacks or conventional, like zoning?
probably conventional, pretty much.
So you mentioned Jefferson County, that's Metro Louisville, and so I'm very familiar with that. What they do, and I think everything they have there has gone through rigorous, review and change over time, is they have a maximum and a minimum for every use. And if you propose below or above those ranges, you have to ask for a waiver, and you have to do a parking study. And so, for example, the last case I was in back in Louisville for was a mixed use development, and one of the uses was a Wawa gas station. And because they have a convenience store with them and a restaurant, and it's more than just the normal kind of parkers kind of eat in. They wanted to have a lot more parking. So we had to get a parking study from some different jurisdictions and show what the usage was in a couple different places. I think there were some different states. And we presented it, and they ended up approving the extra parking. That's just I'm not gonna ask you to change the whole thing, but since you mentioned it, that having the maximums and the minimums
It's an approach.
it's a good approach because it recognizes the fact that everything doesn't fit perfectly within this. So for example, on the chart right now, we have, I think, minimum on restaurants of 1 to 400. But we don't have a maximum, is that right?
These are the standards that we have in our.
Yeah.
Currently are all the minimums.
Yeah, so-
Well, we have maximum standard. That's
There's
what
a
I'm
percentage
Pardon?
of the minimum.
There's a maximum.
So, is that in a number somewhere? But the chart just shows a minimum. Right?
Perfect.
Well, no, that's not-
Is there so for example, just take restaurants by way of example, is there a maximum that's listed somewhere else, Patrick?
Yes, well.
Page
so-
41 has maximum number of parking spaces.
So then you prepare, so,
But that's for buildings that are 60,000.
yeah, now I'm looking for,
But yeah. it's-
so what would be the maximum for so what would be the maximum for, just by way of example, then for a restaurant? This 400, this typical standard I'm familiar with is 1 to 100. 1 to 400 is, that would work downtown because you got a lot of other parking. But I don't think it would work in your shopping center very well.
No, you have to draw a distinction between different types of restaurants, really. I mean, I think the waiver idea is the way to go about it.
Yeah.
Let the applicant come in, either below or above,
Yeah,
with the request and base it on some sort of a study.
Yeah.
That the planning commission can consider.
Which you kind of did already, you already talked about this, if we look at page 41C, so it has two different ordinations, if you're under 60,000 square feet. Under 40%, and then you added except at the discretion of the planning.
so,
And then two, you did, it's 125% for. a
so 140% of
That's also there.
1 to 400 would only take you to, that isn't even, where does it get you? 100. That takes you a different ratio. Somebody do that now.
1 to 300.
Well, that's 1 to 400 is what, 2.5 to 1,000, so. You get another 40% of that is what, so it puts you up to what, 3,500, something like that. And most retailers want, 4.5 or whatever, and that's what they're gonna ask for. That's not necessarily what they should get. I think just the whole idea of having a requirement based on some sort of factual study that can be presented for consideration by the planning commission is the appropriate way to go. I mean, if they're coming in with a chicken fillet, then, based on what we can all observe with that type of restaurant, you want to perhaps grant a few extra spaces. Others may not be able to justify that, so.
I mean, it's just about we're talking about most parts, renovations of existing, like the new Culvers, which is gonna be very popular there over on Boundary. And I'm very familiar with that. And I look at it, I wonder if they're gonna have enough parking space, really, to see how popular that's gonna be. And if you don't have enough in a location like that, then where do they go? Because they're hemmed in on one side by open space and the other side by another restaurant or something like that. If they were in your center, they would just go ahead and park in the Staples parking lot or something, or whatever.
I think
Overflow.
that's the underlying point with Benji's in our discussion is that transect implies that you have urban infrastructure and parking spaces within, which our code does allow you to count. But in many, as you're finding with a lot of your cases, that there's the transects are in areas where there is no urban infrastructure or parking. So if I can talk about numerous examples where, we're a lot, they have a reduced parking standard, there's no other parking around it. And so, like the hotels up there on 20.
Well, that's most of the stuff that we're,
Where you park, if you're allowing a minimum standard and then go with it because they don't pay more money to the developer, then where do people park?
most, I would say almost all developers, new users, and I just throw the Culvers out there. But they're gonna want the number of spaces that they know from their history. They don't want to get in a situation where their people are having to look for parking spaces and steal them from somebody else, right?
Correct.
They just, they won't even normally sign a lease if they're in that kind of position. So I'm just saying I think our code has to be realistic in terms of providing making sure there's a way for users like that to be able to acquire either through waiver or otherwise. That's why I like the minimum and the maximum, because it says, you might take for a sit-down restaurant, you might say somewhere between 100 and what do we have? What is our ratio right now? 400. Yeah. Maybe it'd be that on the minimum side and double that on the high side, and then you got a waiver, if you go one or the other directions.
So we got the max.
But the number we have right there, it looks to me is not sufficient, and it looks like that 140% doesn't even get you within the ballpark of what you need, that's all I'm saying.
I guess I'm kind of just thinking about our shopping centers, that I think some of y'all might disagree. Because I feel like those parking, are too much parking.
I agree with that, so I asked Paul, for example, let's just take Paul as an example, because he can explain it. When I drive by there, I look at it a lot of times, except for the Publix, I look at what is it a Staples or an Office?
Staples.
Staples, I look at that or or in front of the post office and I go like, that just seems to be way over par. And, but then you said that you got requirements from each of those tenants that say, I gotta have.
That's true.
what I gotta have.
That there is a minimum ratio to be maintained, and I would observe, so the Novan Health, that's a redevelopment shopping center, by the way, as you all know. And so Novan Health has just opened. They have absorbed a tremendous number of spaces with their patients and staff going in and out. So automatically there's an increase there, which illustrates another layer to this chart where you need to provide an excess of handicap spaces under certain uses. For example, medical uses can't just be as simple as 1 to 400, et cetera. So yes, Benji's point is dead on. There oftentimes are many excess spaces. And other times there are not. And so it depends on that tenant occupying that building at the particular time. So
The problem is it used to Walmart, for example, with all these used to build for Christmas. And Target, you know, and you know, after the Christmas season, it just looked ridiculous. You had all this pavement. And I guess and they would object if they couldn't have what they needed, but over time I saw they started living with the code requirements that a lot of communities impose, which was less than what they wanted. But you still have a lot of old centers. If you just drive in different places, you'll go, this is ridiculous, how many parking spaces are there? So I think all I'm saying is for new developments and new uses, we should, I think you're right, is try to push them down to the lowest number they can live with, but yet be realistic of what is likely to be the case. And that's why I like the range that might go a little bit more than this. That's all I'm saying.
I agree with that. I think that the planning commission needs some flexibility, that there needs to be a lower and an upper limit, perhaps in the codes.
So this is the lower, and you heard the maximum, so are you suggesting like maybe a footnote or an asterisk, and then we say for minimum standards, say at the discretion of the planning commission after the applicant conducts a parking study, something like that?
I
The parking
think-
study- The planning commission may require a parking study to reduce minimum parking.
I think it should be that the planning commission should be inclined to hear a logical case for an increase or a decrease.
Yeah, and maybe you're, because the way it's done is you just provide a minimum here, and then you go over to that maximum. And it describes two different sizes of buildings, and it says you get either in the one case, 140% more, 125% more, which I'm not sure is enough necessarily in all these cases. But then it goes on to say at the discretion of the planning commission, which doesn't say, you know, how you exercise that discretion. So maybe the whole thing will work if just as you said, if it says except at the discretion of the planning commission, if a parking study, and somehow either just say, you know, what the standards of a parking study are, or, you know, or give the authority to staff to outline how that parking study needs to be done. You know, because that would certainly, if things come to the planning commission that way, then we can look at them and we're not just going like, well, what the heck? You know, we're seeing what is their real experience at, you know.
Doing a parking study utilizing the IT parking manual has been conducted and reviewed by a qualified traffic engineer.
I don't know if they, I mean, I'm not even sure they have to be, there are parameters for these parking studies, and we either say within the following parameters or within the parameters outlined under policy adopted by staff, I don't care, but you know.
Well, I would probably use the IT manual, the parking manual.
But you think there's the IT manual, I don't recall there being an outline of how a parking study is supposed to be
No, they
done.
don't, just the parking.
But so what a parking study usually is, it's for the user, for example, taking a couple of other sites and demonstrating what their requirements are for a comparable use at a comparable location. That's what they are. Yeah,
This one is utilizing a given apartment study reviewed by staff.
Or- it needs to be presented to the planning commission, but, at the discretion of the planning commission, pursuant to a parking, I mean, if we don't have the parameters today, just say parking study.
Oh, that's
Employing, employing, guidelines, adopted by staff or something like that.
How about something like, exception can be granted by the planning commission upon a showing by the applicant that it's necessary to depart from the standards.
Through-
And then they can do it.
Parking study.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
that's fine.
So for example, here from Jasper, you know, if they don't have an analysis, you come in and say, okay, this business is gonna use X number of gallons of water and sewer. And, you know, they'll look at a case study from other locations. I've seen that.
Right.
So they'll take, even if they're not in this jurisdiction, if you have data from similar size units in other jurisdictions, you can take that to them. They will consider that and then determine. So it'd be really the same process by the planning commission to study necessary parking spaces.
Yeah, that'd be good. And then as long as you give them some guidance, staff gives them some guidance how to do it.
That's what I'm saying, the IT manual looks at every use and shows the parking, like the average parking needs for each use.
So the average Culvers may require, you know, someone could come, there you go. That's the way.
That's fine, I think if you could restate that for Nick, and he'll write it in there, I think that works.
Instead of.
But then we need to add that asterisk to the minimum table too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I wouldn't specifically refer to that email. I would just say.
We don't have to.
What would you just, what
Because
did you
I'm
add?
not sure.
I added the given a parking.
Alone,
sticker.
like, guidance staff.
How about upon a showing by the applicant, which showing should be reviewed by staff, that the,
I think the goal
departure
should
from
be
the
to
standards.
minimize parking as much as we possibly can. You don't want to be detrimental to the business.
Make it real.
But business is changing so much now that we've got the internet. You know, even places like Walmart, more people are probably using the internet during holidays to buy stuff than they are going to.
Showing by the applicant.
Can we use some
that,
parking study?
Yeah, I was reading. Walmart hasn't been very successful in its internet sales. And that it's really becoming more and more of a grocery,
And then you.
even though it started as all this white goods or whatever you saw. Now it's becoming more and more of a grocery, and a higher percentage of their sales are grocery.
That Walmart.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did have I don't know if we're through with what, are we done with that? Because I did have a few comments on this chart.
I think we're done as long as we got the language.
When we get into the asterisk, the minimum, so, I think, Nicholas, if you can put an asterisk on the top of the, yeah, we like all of those, and then just, we'll have to create another.
Behind the little number,
And
motor row parking spaces required.
with the, you know, like, put out there. The same thing. So that makes sense, if you just mark that.
There, right? And so then I go in there and I say, I need 100 lines.
So are you ready for my comment?
Yes.
Okay, so I have three kind of quick comments. Comment number one is, I'm concerned that in the chart that's on top of page 40, where we're talking about restaurants, drive-throughs, et cetera, we've eliminated the extra spots for employees. I don't recall that is what we talked about. I thought we wanted to keep those extra spots for employees. My second comment is,
Well, that was my comment that got us into this whole discussion
okay,
of the 1 to 400, but I was willing to live with the 1 to 400 as long as we address maximums too, because you can address the employees and the maximums. But 1 to 400 for small restaurants wouldn't even cover your employees, let alone people coming to it. But I think I was hoping that what we were talking about for the revised language would cover that.
okay. My preference would be to specify for employee parking, but whatever the group consensus is. The second comment I have is, and we've talked about a number of different grocery stores today. I'm wondering if we need to have a separate standard for grocery stores. And I've lived here for 11 years now, and I've seen grocery stores come and go. And it seems like they never have enough parking, especially for peak usage times such as the weekends. I'm speaking specifically to Publix on Ladies Island, Harris Teeter on Ladies Island on the weekends. And also I have grave concerns about Aldi coming into Beaufort Station. Benj and I disagree about parking situation over at Beaufort Station, but I think it's barely adequate right now, and Aldi's not even open yet. So I really think we should consider talking about a different standard for grocery stores. And that it's cognizant of what's around them, because some of these places, just like the culvert, doesn't have a place for the overflow people to go. And so that is something that we need to talk about. The other comment I have is about the industrial parking. I disagree that there should be no minimum number of parking for an industrial use, because they have employees, they have trucks, they need parking. And if they don't have it, they're gonna park in the neighborhoods, or they're gonna, take somebody else's parking. And I think we do need to address that standard. I don't know what it is, maybe Christopher's book may give us some guidance on that, but.
Usually like 1 per 1,000, and then how many employees you have, that's like the general.
Well, I will tell you that West Grocery Store, one for four.
No, it's 5,000.
Yeah, it's, yeah, I mean, this number is completely unrealistic from Hunter's grocery store. Which, and then you do the 125%, it means that every time we get it, and we may never get another grocery store, but I'm just saying, every time we get a grocery store, we're gonna have a waiver hearing or an exception hearing. Because we don't, this 400 number, well, 400 is just inadequate, right? You're doing a 1-2 for 200, and it's a pretty full parking lot,
It's a, yes.
right?
Well, it starts with, in this manual, it starts for grocery stores, 1 parking space per 200 square feet.
That's right.
So
That's
with that, I think we need
That
to
should be
add-
your minimum, actually,
Do we want-
not your, we got half that minimum.
That's your 5,000.
That's right.
Add a box.
We'll add a box, is
Yeah.
everybody agree to add a box on the grocery?
Grocery stores.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay, and then
And
You brought up-
one per 200, is that?
Well, so then the question
is that a good basic standard?
Well, one to-
5 per 1,000, 1 per 200.
is that's for really for all retail. Now, Staples never uses that,
No.
but a Walmart, they will definitely use 1 to 200.
So you wanna go down to 1 to 300 square feet? 1 per 300.
We were
That's-
1 to 300, now we're at 1 to 400.
That's 3 1/4 per 1,000, and that's a bare minimum of what any retailer's gonna want. I'm not saying that that's what they really require, but that's what they're gonna want. I think that's a pretty good floor.
We'll try and set.
So long as you can get a waiver, argue for, a reasonable waiver.
So I mean, just by way of example,
Let's just make all 3. That's conventional.
Change all the 400s to 300s.
you couldn't have even gotten, because that's a new build over there. So if you were doing the Publix now, you couldn't have even gotten a lease by them until you got your waiver approved. And
Correct.
and that's why I think it should be a little more realistic. That's why I like that. Well, anyway, that's just me.
Do you all wanna change the transects? I think that's,
I don't-
right now it's 1 per 400.
I don't think we should change it, make the transect worse.
We have something against parking spaces.
I do, actually.
Everybody writing.
I'd rather
redevelop
not,
it,
yeah,
you know,
I would
places.
not wanna see it parking requirements. Cause transect, the idea is to have shared parking, street parking and stuff like that, so I don't know.
Yeah.
And the empty bike racks, and there's ideas and there's realities of how people live around here. They like to drive and they like to park.
I will say that usually saves us on the part.
And I never see any bikes in those bike racks.
Again, the chart is for minimum.
Where would you bike ride?
the chart is for minimums, and so what we're really talking about is the maximums. We'll keep going back to the maximums. So if you're trying to reduce
That's right.
parking, you want to set your minimums at a reasonable standard that's minimum. But you have to allow the maximums to grow to whatever you need without having to come back to the commission. So,
Yeah, I agree with that. My only point is that if to just get the number that every retailer is gonna require for a normal retail use, like a grocery or like a big box Walmart, we're not gonna have another one, but usually cause what we're saying is you gotta do a parking study for an exception. That should be the unusual, extraordinary case, rather than just to be able to build a grocery store at Paul Center. And the way we've written it right now, you couldn't have done that Publix without telling Publix, listen, I can't really promise you anything until we go through a public hearing review by the planning commission on a waiver study.
Right. So you could see another freestanding grocery store, I think, in this community in the next 5 years, a little farther out.
Or
That would be
Target, which is a grocery store.
But you could,
Yeah, Target.
you could see a food line, for example, farther out, I think, with, 10,000 square feet of shops with out on Highway 170 or elsewhere. I could see that happening.
Okay.
And so that'll bring up the whole issue of the parking ratio, 5-to-1.
Or like you said, a Target in a renovated center somewhere.
Sure.
You probably can already figure out where one could go around there.
But
somewhere.
that's the thing, it's like there is, that situation exists at Buford Station, if Aldi gets filled, and they probably will. Then they'll spill over into the outboard side of the PetSmart spaces, and it'll all work.
Right.
It'll all work on a day-to-day basis. Same thing with my property, it'll, they go and come from side to side and so forth. Sometimes they're full and sometimes they're not. And there's still room for other businesses to come in there, which will increase parking at X point, so, yeah.
So that's all I had.
well, how do we address that? I want to go back.
Flexibility.
I want to, yeah. I agree with that, but if you got a mom and pop grocery store that's going in, just one of the nodes out in one of the rural areas getting developed in residential, you don't want to have them face a minimum that's a higher parking ratio to try and meet the large Publix grocery store.
But
So,
it's gonna be a lot smaller,
because it's gonna be so much smaller.
so the whole thing is 400 square feet, then they need to have 2 parking spots. That doesn't seem odd to me. I mean,
No,
I mean, as long as
that's-
we're flexible with the waiver thing, I don't have a problem with it. I just hate to get in a situation where, just my experience has been, it's better to have fewer exceptions and waivers than more. If your code becomes just a series of exceptions and waivers because we weren't realistic in the get-go, then, you're eventually gonna get people going, what does this code mean? Everybody who comes in front of us is asking for an exception. Well, it was because we were so stringent, in what we allowed at the get-go. That's all. It's sort of what your approach is to things. That's just been my experience, but oh my God.
But again, you're going to the maximum, that's what you're looking.
That's right, it's the
You're
maximum,
going for
which
the
is the
maximum,
issue.
so do we have an exception here on the maximum side for grocery stores or large retail?
I would say 5 to 1,000.
Well, right now it's written as though it's a percentage, so you
yeah,
end
so
up having
for
to,
buildings with greater than 60,000 square feet, that's C2. Right?
Right.
And we have the exception built in there. Upon, and it's that language about.
But that
upon
only
show.
applies to buildings over 60,000 feet, which is not realistic. So you probably get a new food line, and again, just for
How
example,
big is Food Line?
a new one would be 36,000.
Okay, well, then maybe the 60,000 is, well.
well,
we-
the
we-
hundred,
We also allow it in one for the smaller buildings,
Okay, all right.
so we've.
my point is the exception will always work, it's just whether it's a good idea to write a code knowing that perhaps fully everything is gonna ask for an exception. That's all I'm saying, because that's sort of what we've done. That's just my bet, is you'll get a lot of exceptions, and then you're just having these hearings looking at parking studies all the time. But if you want to go that route, it'll work, it's kind of a
Well, I think we can adjust the 140 and 125%
up a little bit.
up a little bit.
That's where I was.
That helps some, yeah. Whether it gets you to the 1 to 200, yeah.
So what would we adjust that up to? 160% in both cases? 150%?
Well, to get to 1 to 200, if the minimum standard is 1 to 400, you gotta get 200%.
That's right.
So.
But you can make that, limit that only to a grocery store.
Well,
Yeah.
we're knocking it down to 300.
Or,
We're knocking it down to 200 for the grocery store.
200 for the grocery store, 300 for.
Minimum is.
Yeah.
100. They have,
So they're gonna get lots of extra parking for the minimum. And they're the ones that always ask for it, from
Sure.
what I recall here. Aldi, the case.
I would think the grocery should have one, 5 spaces to 1,000. Retailers are gonna want 3.5 to 4 to 1,000. That's reasonable. And then you just have some provision for a waiver, and I agree with Bill that you don't wanna have too many waivers in your code, but look at our code now, just not to digress. But you look at the consideration of the car wash that wanted to build, and they were struggling with extra space, and then we got the oil change joint on Highway 170, and they were required to have a retail space in front, and it's just sitting there, and it's never gonna get leased.
yeah, they got a police sign on it.
Yeah, and they're never gonna build
No,
that.
they're never gonna.
And so, you know, conversely, the code as written, and we'll get into those issues. But as written, I mean, there really ought to be, it does argue in favor of having waivers from time to time, you know, under reasonable circumstances.
Yeah, a code like this, it does.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would disagree, it's extremely, how low I read brown. Somewhere.
Yes.
All right, we got through that subject then.
What about the industrial?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should.
You gotta have the space.
There are different standards, so there's one for light industrial use, one for medium, and one for heavy industrial use. We could do, so it's with light industrial, it's 1 space per 1,000 square feet of gross floor area, up to 20,000 square feet. That's one example out of Minneapolis, or 1 per 500 square feet, which I don't know, that's a little high. Out of California, but medium is the same, it's 1 space per 1,000 square feet of gross floor area up to 20,000, and heavy is 1 per 2,000 square feet, or, I mean, do we really have heavy industrial? We don't know.
No, I
but-
really don't have any. Every place I've ever worked at is at the 1 per 1,000.
I think 1 per 1,000 is a good number. That's for industrial, for automobiles.
We don't have any.
So
1 per 1,000 square feet.
5 spaces for a little
1,000
office
square
down
feet
there on
of
Depot.
gross
That's
floor area.
What if it's like a storage?
If you get a,
It's not an industrial.
Is that a retail use?
well, a distribution facility, I don't know if we're gonna have any, but if you had
1,000 square feet.
so if you had a 200,000 square foot distribution facility,
Of gross
or
floor.
larger, that'd be then 200 spaces.
Yeah, you don't need that. Yeah,
That's 1 to 1,000,
I
that's.
saw this in here, it basically allows, I think we need to make one determination.
We don't think gross.
25.
So if we put 1 per 1,000 and depending on the size, and they thought they needed an exception, they could come to us under the next code section, just like anything else.
Right.
Yeah, but that section is is an exception for maximum, not for going lower. We're gonna have to have an exception for going lower then.
Gross floor area.
Well, I thought that's what you were talking about. You'd have the footnote, and if you wanted to go lower to address Benji's concerns, if you were trying to develop on the trans side, that.
What if we just say like one per 2 employees or something like that, what's that?
On industrial,
One per.
It's just hard for us to know how many.
There is,
generally, I don't like the employee thing is because those change, from use to use, one day it's this guy and next day it's already built and he sells it out to somebody else and he's got different employee count, but it's the only thing that really makes sense for industrial facilities. Nobody's gonna build one without enough parking spaces, because they usually don't have anything around them they can steal from,
Well, except neighborhoods or.
maybe, or parking, in the right of way like the car dealers do. Right?
Well,
They just park up.
1 per thousand or a half per thousand for anything above 20,000 feet.
Yeah, maybe something like that.
How do we address the vehicles, the trucks?
Well, yeah, that's the other
That's the
thing.
next step.
You put one truck and it covers 5 parking spots, or more.
Typically, semi with.
Well, they've gotta have a turn ratio, to be able to, maneuver and get to the dock. And,
This doesn't include truck parking. This is just-
Yes, because we really don't have any distribution facilities here, and I just don't see that being, there's only 2 industrial areas in the whole city. Not really on a highway.
Mhm.
You have any industrial, why would you ever build a fucking distribution?
Well, it's going over there by the have, truck docks on the back side.
Yeah, that's not including parking ratios.
When you go out the back way,
That's not included, you don't include those things in your parking ratios.
that's just the truck docks. The
Right.
difference is this, nobody,
Over 20.
what about parking? You
Well,
need
then
to
it's- well, then
leaving
it's-
the rocking a trailer.
They can't park out in regular parking anyhow, so they have to accommodate that for landing.
An industrial facility, you're going to have not only truck dock, but you're gonna have spaces where they'll leave the trailer. And stop, not stop.
I don't think we have to worry about that. That's just not gonna be, and if we do have the rare instance where we have like a truck distribution or something, a truck stop or something, we'll just have to. I think it goes to basically the code administrator, but I just don't ever see that occur here.
Well, you're gonna interpret these anyway as
Yeah.
you're gonna interpret these as automobile, customer and employee parking, not deliveries and all that kind of stuff, right? So they're gonna have to independently on a development plan show where their truck parking is gonna be.
Right.
Right, yeah.
Just like Paul's saying, no truck stop or truck major truck distribution facility is gonna come to Beaufort because we're not next to a regional highway. We're too far. It just doesn't make any sense. So.
Yeah, we don't have. Boundaries are figured out.
So, Mr. Chairman, when we're done with this, I have a suggestion. I don't know if everybody agrees, but Mr. Murphy is here. He did provide us with information that we had requested previously. I wonder if we could maybe address his issues before moving on to other parts of this.
Sure,
So what's next?
I just want to be clear where we are right now. Have we asked all the questions that we have on previously discussed items in here?
I had some back on page 18.
I think you guys talked about a little bit change in the buffer areas, if you remember, so it's just whether you want to talk about that now, or you want to go to Mr. Murphy.
what's with the exception? So we do have exceptions, parcels in the LI district are exempt from these requirements. We should probably
We
select
should
that.
take that out, yeah, if we're.
Since we- yeah.
All right, then maybe before we go to the buffers, let's go ahead and go to.
And then come back to where I wanted on page 18. I don't care what order you do, because I had the question. I'll go back.
Dr. Murphy.
Yeah.
Obviously, yes.
Yeah.
Are you on the clock to the city for your attendance here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all got your definitions here. I know I've read them, so.
We want to go back to the definition section in the front of chapter 5. It's something that we may want to add in, I guess.
I was assuming for suggestions of including.
5.3. Okay, so it's on page, starts on 16 and goes over to 17. Okay.
Here we go. So 5.1.2, that's where we have the definitions. So I guess, right, Mike? Yeah. The question is if we want to include any of Mr. Murphy's recommendations, suggestions on definitions here in this section.
Well, if I can preface the whole thing, one of the, reasons that I would like to see them in is because they sometimes come up, when, permits are, brought into planning for tree removals, and it's just better to have, a definition of, a real definition of what the terms mean, when they're kind of thrown around on, the permits and presented to, the layman here in planning. And then, this, over mature tree, that was a question that was brought up, and it was actually, kind of, detailed, 2 weeks ago by, the town of, Mount Pleasant. They called me about over mature trees that an arborist had written a report on 4 live oaks being over mature, and they were, kind of, wondering about the true, definition of it. And in a situation like, with live oaks, you really can't have an over mature tree there.
That's what I was thinking.
You know, we don't know how long they're gonna live, and so, changing the term to senescent, kind of brings it into a little more of a better detail of, that the tree is weakening and it could be dying. And over mature trees, a lot of times can be, mitigated for, so the mitigation pruning is in there, as the definition. And, what a tree risk assessment, details, when somebody says they have assessed the tree, so, it's just, I think a better way to, move forward, having these, definitions, so we could go back and make sure everybody's, and we say in arboriculture, make sure everybody's climbing the same tree.
So I like the idea of definitions too. I do think that the senescent tree one, is too long. For definition, it's a great explanation, but, you know, I like to see definitions be 1 or 2 sentences, and maybe keep your first sentence and then add some language in there about, that, you know, cannot be saved or restored by, you know, movies or something like that. The other thing I thought was interesting was that your clear cutting definition is really long too, and we, as a commission, have struggled with clear cutting and the definition that we want to use too, so I'm glad we're not alone here.
I didn't, you know, I sort of, outsourced the clear cutting and the senescent and the open mature. And so I kind of brought it from a couple of sources and, didn't want to leave anything out that I thought was important. So I knew they were long. They're very long, but,
Not that they're not good,
Not good.
but they are long.
So I think Kim's was the third point, Mr. Murphy, with the first paragraph. seems to be kind of a good summary, but would there be anything without work as a definition? Or does it need to be added to? Whoever's.
You're talking about just keep the whole
Sentence
first paragraph?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's a good.
Yeah,
That would be a really long definition.
Well, here's the question, we only need a definition if there's some reference to that definition elsewhere in the code. Do we use the senescent tree language? I don't think so.
This is an overview.
Yeah, we've used over mature.
Yeah. So it needs to be replaced.
Oh, okay.
So when you're doing that, Nicholas, we need to go to over mature tree or put over mature tree in parentheses. There it is, there it is. It's right in there. So we would be replacing over mature tree.
We want to say
Could we do it in the alternative? Cause it kind of sounds like Mr. Murphy's telling us that senescent might be a more accurate, term.
We would be replacing it over mature with senescent, right?
Well, I think, yeah.
What would you recommend?
I would like to see the over mature. Then, see senescent tree, because the over mature tree is kind of, a standard term now. And it should, I think the city, this is a good opportunity to stand up and show. That there's a difference. That's good.
Yeah.
And if people look for it, it'll be in there and they'll know that this is what we're talking about.
Oh, so over mature and senescent are exactly the same thing.
Yes.
Okay.
So is that first paragraph okay, or would you add anything?
Yeah, no, that's good. There may be. That would kind of sum it up. Maybe the three, and in the third paragraph, if we could. Put some of that in, or maybe just add that in, maybe just add the third paragraph back to the first. And then leave it at that, or is that still too long?
I think that's,
I think that's too much.
yeah,
So what's with the other three or mitigation pruning? Do we have that currently in there?
You don't have that definition now.
Should we add those into?
I like that.
I think we have to because it's contained in the paragraph we just had.
Well, one of the things that I've found over the past couple of months of looking at the tree removal requests was that the arborists were saying that here's the things that are wrong with this tree. Period. And in a true tree risk assessment, you do find the defects in the tree, but the most important part of the tree risk assessment is the arborist's recommendations on how those defects can be mitigated. So the arborist's job is to, if the tree can at any time, at any point, be made safer and have the risk reduced to a level that's acceptable by all parties, then that his experience on what can be done to that tree to make it to make it acceptable to stay. It's usually reduction pruning or limb removal or just deadwood removal.
So you're kind of talking about two definitions at once, the mitigation pruning, which we all like, and I think we would like to add, but you also mentioned tree risk assessment. But this definition doesn't address that second part of it, about the possible solutions. Do we want to add some language to the tree risk assessment definition?
Well, a tree risk assessment by a qualified tree risk assessor, that's an anagram. The person has a track qualification, TRAQ. And in that, qualification is all these details, all the details. So, I would think that the tree risk assessment would get longer than the clear cutting and the senescent tree combined, if we put everything in that is needed.
What if we just, for tree risk assessment, what if we kept all your language, and put a comma after that final word, risk? And addresses possible mitigation strategies or something, just something like that.
Or by.
Oh, we just-
Or by a qualified, the systematic process by a qualified tree risk assessor. I mean.
So that's some public comment in there.
Oh. Another attorney.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I had the same exact thought as you, Kim, and I think listening to Michael, like, I think having the word referencing mitigation and opportunities for mitigation in the tree risk assessment definition is probably important to get at exactly what you described as some arborist reports not including that. And so by having it there, you're making it clear that it's the expectation that that's included in that assessment.
And that's gonna be more helpful to staff or the planning commission too, to have that information.
yeah.
Can I come back with that and get that back to Christopher or?
We probably need to by tomorrow. We're probably gonna be a day late on sending you a package just because we were trying to make all these changes and then send it to you, if that makes sense to everybody. Can send it tomorrow,
Are you comfortable with
but
comma and addresses mitigation strategies? Something just that
Yes.
simple?
but in the next week, if you could change it, that's just, we were
Well, I
trying
just
to.
wanted to check, just to
Sure.
refer back to the book. And,
I was just
and
gonna send this out, the draft, with the planning commission packet tomorrow, so they could make a formal recommendation next week. down to here.
Okay.
Thought that you might be ready to adopt this, right? But the next week, they can make the change at the hearing.
Okay.
If they decide. to.
Okay, I hear it.
You ask her if it's answers.
Of what, the minutes or?
Yeah, the draft, usually she sends me a draft and then I work on her draft.
Okay, yeah, I'll let her know.
That's me. She went away before I could ask her myself, so.
And clear cutting, we already have pretty much the same statement. Just reduced the sentence.
Okay.
So it's the first sentence that's our definition, right? The first sentence of Michael's is. the
Yes,
same as
that's pretty
what we
much
came
what we
up
already have,
with.
yeah.
Well, that first paragraph or through?
I just leave what we have there in the first sentence.
Yeah, I think the first sentence is covered. My only question is, should there be any, percentage number or something added? Is it just, is it okay? Is it too broad to have just most or all? I mean, all is obviously fine, but most, I don't know what most means.
Well, it's clear cut, just
Anything over 51%.
Yeah, we were debating that last time.
well, just so we're clear, maybe just so I'm clear, where is clear, other than
Here.
the definition? I know that, but other than the definition, there's no reason to have a definition unless it's somehow a regulated
Don't we
item in
have
the
it in
code.
the back?
So where is clear cutting used as
Where is it mentioned?
yeah, where is it mentioned in the code? I know we talk about,
Chapter 12 is mentioned,
Yeah,
that's where the penalties for
yeah.
doing things are.
no, but it had to be in here somewhere that we talked about with great length, and it's in here about how cutting any kind of,
Canopy.
is it in there?
Related to the canopy, yeah.
Well, it had to do, I thought we addressed it where we said if you cut any trees down within 2 years without a permit, but I don't know if the term clear cutting appears anymore in there.
No, we didn't. You're right. You take that out. Took it out.
Yeah, on page 13, it says tree removal without a permit. And that may have been where the whole clear cutting thing used to exist.
Yeah,
So I just don't know if we have clear cutting in here as some kind of action that's prohibited. You guys able to do a word search?
I was, that's me on.
No,
It tells you.
are you able to do a word search in the
Your document.
Nick?
Yeah, so when what I've got pulled up here, clear cutting, it's just definitions mentioned.
That's what I was thinking. It may not be, need to happen in there anymore.
Clear cutting is just the definition.
I mean, it's a hot button item for the public.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. I'm thinking that the definition may no longer be needed because it's not an identified action within the code itself.
This is the current code section 12 where it mentions it.
And we addressed it by what I just mentioned.
I think we made a note that we need to, when we get to chapter 12, we need
Yeah.
to do something about that.
you're right.
We haven't
Well,
actually
is that
done.
sentence okay? It seems like a pretty.
Yeah, but there's no reason to have a definition if it's not defining anything that appears otherwise in the code. If
Or
it's
in that
only,
section.
if it's only there as a definition, you don't have it.
We don't recognize
It
it.
doesn't serve a purpose.
We don't recognize it.
I mean, we may want it for chapter 12, when we get to chapter 12, but I don't know that we need to have it in.
Well,
What have we got,
Well,
5?
that's like hard just to leave it here.
I think, my point is, I think that we've taken care of what used to be considered clear cutting in a different way,
Right.
in different ways. And page 13 was the main way that we addressed it. We just said, well, you can just look and see where we get it on page 13. Where we talk about tree removal without a permit.
We do have a section about tree removal without permit
what I'm
prior to
referring to.
development.
That's what I was just
Yeah,
referring
that's
to.
what
Yeah.
this is.
But we don't call it clear cutting anymore.
Exactly, no.
So
We got rid of clear cut.
I think we should take the definition of clear cutting out of chapter 5, but I think we should consider putting it in to chapter 12 if we're gonna keep that penalty provision that's already in there. Or if we're gonna take that out, then we won't need it there either.
Worry about it.
Like that.
Yes, yeah. So are we agreed we're gonna take that definition out?
Yeah, where it appeared in 12, and I think we're, because we now, that was called clear cutting in anticipation of development. But we really deal with it now on that. On page 13, the way we do it, it's probably no longer needed in chapter 12 to be referenced as clear cutting in anticipation of development, because we made it clear that if you do any cutting of any trees in anticipation of development, the way it's defined on page 13, you can't get a permit. Then on top of it, we got all the mitigation things that show up elsewhere in our code.
Yeah, we spent about 3 hours on that last.
All right, this is not.
So then my other question is, are these other terms here, tree risk assessment and those things are important to have as definitions, are they? Do they relate to something specific?
I thought we were
Okay.
saying we're gonna increase.
I've got the ending for that tree risk assessment.
Okay,
You wanna go back to the definition for a tree risk assessment?
he doesn't want to come
And
back.
I've got the 11th hour, request for senescent tree paragraph.
Oh, you got a spruce pine, you're also.
Oh, and the spruce pine, yeah, that's at the top. That needs to be put in for.
We'll go pretty.
Here, looking it up.
That needs to be added to the table.
Yes,
So what's with the tree risk assessment? Do you have anything?
so tree risk assessment, and evaluate tree risk. And to recommend mitigation procedures as needed. As needed.
And that,
I would take out as needed. I would just say,
I recommend mitigation
put a
procedure.
period after procedures,
Yes,
because that as needed is like, oh.
yes.
and that's in the definition, so I'm just asking, because I can't find it, where in the code is tree risk assessment otherwise used? Well, we can't, there's no reason to put it as a definition if it isn't a code. It's in the lake to something that's otherwise happening in the code.
Can you maybe, search the document to see if you have anything? For your risks?
I don't think they do.
For your risks, we're giving search it.
I mean, it's a good idea, but if all we do is define it.
There is an A1 appendix
Yeah,
for
that's
risk
not-
assessment. Certified arborist.
It's in with the certified arborist report. That. That.
No,
Pull that
okay,
in.
wait a minute. Under the, over mature trees, assessment tree, we talk about, mitigation. And mitigation pruning, and we've added mitigation pruning and mitigation pruning, adds words tree risk assessment.
And it is in the appendix.
Circular.
Getting rid of the appendices. I thought we.
Yeah, we added the appendices to the actual. I think right now it is required.
So we want to have appendices.
Oh, no, we're folding it into this.
It's gonna be part of chapter 5, not a separate appendix.
Yes, see?
Yeah, it looks like 5.1.3 is the certified arborist report in the draft. That page, 4,
Oh, okay, I see here,
says tree risk assessment.
so there is,
The requirements.
So we're good with leaving it.
Yeah, well,
so that's all I needed to know is if it was in here someplace.
we already added it again too.
No, she just found it at 5.1.3 that talks about a tree risk assessment, so then we do need the definition, so that's fine.
Now we're to the spruce pine, whether we want to add spruce pine. And then we're also, there was discussion about.
It was already added.
Yeah, it is. Right.
Oh, yeah, we already did it.
Already in there.
No, I don't know that I finished the discussion and Laurel Oaks.
Water these like these 3 lines here, but add these 3 lines here. So it'd be the same length as the first paragraph.
I think that that language you want to add is an explanation of what happens to senescent trees as opposed to a definition. To me, I would rather stick with what we have, and what we have ends after its life cycle.
There was that quick, I think we all. Nobody agrees, but okay, but the Canada, the definition, he wrote it up there, so we're trying to do it real time, so we don't have to go back.
True, because I.
Remember what we did,
Okay.
and then the tree risk assessment, that works, and then risk, he already put in. So now, we already have spruce pine that was added.
Okay.
And then I think really there was the question from before about the laurel oak and whether that should be all other pines, whether those should be added or not. Well, I think we were waiting to come back because you weren't here the last time. For discussion on that, because I think we will raise some questions. So that's on page 17. And then Not in this fight, so, I think you just, why would you have added a real? All of the pines, another 24. That would be the question. It's not really, button up.
Well, so arboriculturally, there's no there's no real reason to kind of condemn an entire species of tree because of the possibility of things happening to it. The laurel oak and the loblolly pine are the two most prevalent trees that we have in the low country. So just statistically, during a storm, you're gonna get more of those trees breaking and falling, but they're not necessarily all bad trees. I think the ordinance and the direction that planning is going with as far as having arboricultural inspection of the permits, the bad trees will be removed and the trees that aren't bad will, will stay. So it's, you have a tree cover in the city and, that canopy is, 40% laurel oak and maybe, 60% laurel oak and pine or so, I don't, it's just numbers now without a canopy survey. But most of the trees are laurel oak and pine. And, it's just, I think if we're gonna step forward and be the tree city that we've been for so long, we should include them in with the protection. Now, they certainly wouldn't be protected at the same level as trees like live oaks that can never get over mature and, that are sturdy and resilient. They're just normal trees. So if this was a normal city in a normal town, they would be your best trees. A lot of towns, a lot of areas don't have live oaks, they don't have that key tree, that fir oak or white oak or that tree that's kind of a signature for the area. And we just happen to have the probably worldwide most resilient and bulletproof tree ever growing, that ever grew. So, we have these other trees have a lot to make up for before they can be like the live oak, and they're not. So it just doesn't make sense to leave them out.
So you think, well, I see on this list, we have laurel oak on here.
Well, that's new.
I don't see water oak on here. Is water oak, is that its own species? Or is that
Well,
like a nickname?
the water oak is its own species,
Okay.
and I just thought it would be too much. Too much to ask because it's there's so much folklore behind it and all those damn water oaks. That's how the sentence starts. And the fact is that there's not a lot of water oak here. Most of the trees that people think are water oaks are actually laurel oaks. They kind of, most of the lay people just kind of group them in because they're not live oaks. And then they just kind of I feel like they're hard to differentiate from.
Have you found that the surveyors are accurate when they mark these trees, laurel oaks or water oaks or?
No. No.
It's probably not easy for a layman to make that distinction,
No.
I suspect.
No, and the surveyors to their benefit, I mean, they've got so much to think about. And then they're thumbing through the little tree leaf book or doing the ID camera on the leaf. And it's just not, because there's a lot of considerations, the bark and the tree form, the winter silhouettes. I mean, when the leaves are off the trees, it's just, the winter surveys are tough to relook at. And there's a lot of other oaks out there, there's 4 or 5 different kinds of red oaks and there's blue oak. It's just a lot for a surveyor to figure out, but that's the importance of having the arborist, review the survey and assess the trees and, get the species right.
So we're just adding those specimen trees because to your mind, like the loblolly pine, or and the hickory tree, if they get dangerous when they get over mature.
They should be, yeah, towards that diameter that they would be getting into the landmark tree area. That would be when they are kind of getting into their, getting a little senescent, yes.
By the way, senescence, we have that under, see the double asterisk over mature, so should we replace that with the senescent?
Yes, yes.
Where is that? Cause I was looking to see.
It's,
17 in the whole.
Color 17.
All right, sorry.
the dope right here.
So I'm feeling like senescent on the left, or they write over mature.
So that is the only
Yeah,
place so
well,
far. I've seen in the
they
code
would
where
put in
that-
over mature now, but now they should put it.
That is that the only place in the code that we use the term over mature?
Nick, you
I
want
don't
to do
think
a
I didn't
word
find it
search for
anywhere else.
over mature? Please.
I just. That
And you might wanna do it. It's 2 words, but it's gonna do it because we always spell it the same way.
I think it is, to be honest with you, yeah. So it's here and it's in the definition section,
Well, as long as it's
Yeah.
in someplace, then it can be in the definitions, okay.
but yeah, right.
We're all good.
That it on those?
Do you have anything else we wanted to ask Mr. Murphy about?
Yes, Steve?
I might have missed it. Were you, Michael, were you asking for spruce to be listed in this table that we're on right now? Or is it fall under all other pines?
No, it should be its own. It should be listed, not as all of it. It should be Pinus glabra in there.
Or just
Because-
specimen tree, or is a landmark tree?
Oh, no, that could go landmark.
They could go where?
That could go, landmark. Yeah. It's actually not a pine.
So it's a landmark at 14 inches?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like the holly. It would be
Oh,
the
yeah.
hollies.
Holly, yeah.
So what, so specimen at 8 and then landmark at 14.
Specimen at 8.
You might want to write it out in inches instead of the.
And 60.
14.
So it's not a pine tree, what is it then? Michael?
That's good.
It's oh no, actually it is a pine, but it's not like our pines. It's not like the loblolly pine. It's the little tiny cone and kind of a little different form. It's more ornamental, right? But it can get tall. It's native, it's actually native to the. And then it's like the bluff oak, it's only found, like there's a lot of them on Bray's Island and there's a lot of them on Data. And then you just don't see them, they're kind of scattered, there's like find one here, one there.
I did want to ask about the southern magnolia. Wanted to make sure that we were right. So you've got specimen at 4 inches and landmark at 24 inches.
Well, we're changing the 4 to 8.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, all
Words
those are
should
8.
go to 8 because they're not
Okay.
showing up, they would show up on the,
Okay,
uh,
sorry, I was
you
misreading
could
that.
get the surveyors to do for, that they would have to. It'd be too much for them to identify every 4 inch.
Okay,
I want to leave the landmark 24 for magnolia.
think that just was, that could go down to 18. Or even 14, that could go down to 14.
People who love magnolias.
Hate them when they start shedding.
It depends on where they are.
Yeah.
Like your yard or the neighbor's.
In a public park, it's nice to look at, but not in your yard, yeah.
Landscapers say the only people that plant them are people that move down from the north.
Real.
Seven magnolia.
Okay, I already had a bunch of them on my property. Yes. Fortunately, they're all over 14 inches. All right, so can we move on? Okay, Bill.
I just had a question at 5.3.2. 17 and 18. So the on 17, it's applicability, and then there's a paragraph under that. I just didn't understand it. All development proposed subsequent to the adoption of section, I think it's supposed to be this section. Then it says, with the exception of those activities specifically listed herein, shall be subject to the following standards. Then it goes on, in the event any proposed development is subject to the zoning district requirements that conflict with one or more standards contained in this section, this zoning requirement shall govern it. Just, can you explain to me what that means? What's the conflict that we're worried about where the zoning district regulation might conflict with this and govern? Just, I was worried there was something unintentional might be
Well,
involved
I
there.
think I did that because we have so many cross references in our code and. Probably why I wrote it that way.
Have you run into a situation like that?
But I don't know that they usually would come up, so that I'm good with it. Still it that way. We had the appendix before.
I mean, I was thinking, maybe if it was a setback thing and we're concerned about a tree being in a setback area, the setbacks gotta apply. But I think we have provisions elsewhere in this landscape thing where I think we've addressed every possible exception where there's a conflict.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, that probably is a meeting.
I just didn't know if that was
So maybe in the event, so let's just get rid of
that
it.
whole any event might go on. And then down,
Call it a period.
yeah, and then just say this section instead of just of section, this section, first line area. And then under 2, I just don't understand this, where it says, all proposed non-residential, multifamily, residential, mixed-use development units.
Optional.
Hmm?
Sorry, we just added. And then,
No, wait.
right there next to.
Of this section.
Sorry, we.
2, right under that, 2 required canopy coverage for new development.
Canopy covering.
So I'm just trying to understand that. It says all proposed non-residential, multifamily, residential, and mixed-use development. And then there's a comma, units anticipated. I don't even know if that word units or that comma needs to be there, but it says anticipated to have a land disturbance area greater than 5,000 square feet or to have shared parking. Why is that or to have shared parking in there? I just didn't understand the relevance of that.
Let me just read this.
And then the and is misplaced there as well.
Yeah.
I was just thinking it should maybe end after 5,000 square feet.
Yeah, I don't,
Shall
well,
be
it's in the
subject.
case that you did a big share, I don't know why.
I just don't know what, I was trying to understand what that was referring to, how it even was relevant.
I think it's just I was just adding shared parking or wherever I got it from.
Maybe just take that out and get rid of that and, so where it says or to have shared parking and comma just comes out. Does that make sense? And also the word units, I think, the comma units comes out.
Yeah.
So it should read all proposed non-residential, multifamily, residential and mixed-use development anticipated to have land disturbance area greater than 5,000 square feet shall be subject to the minimum blah blah.
Yeah, get rid of the units.
That makes sense?
Yes. and get relief. After shot, before shot. Yeah.
Then I got another question, when you get that one fixed.
Yep.
Under 5, fenestration, where it says, should the development protect more over 30% of the existing tree canopy, the appropriate approval body may authorize up to a 20% reduction in required fenestration of any building. I'm just curious. I know it's a may, so it doesn't say shall, but it just seems to me that they're kind of totally different things. Why do we want to give somebody a relief from fenestration just because they have more trees?
And why do we want to limit it to the T5 UC district?
Well, the thought is if you have more trees, it kind of buffers and. Right, the fenestration is trying to make it more pedestrian friendly, but if you have trees instead, it also is kind of pedestrian friendly in a way, right? And so it's kind of like allowing more of
I
it.
mean, have you run into a situation where somebody was asking for some relief from fenestration?
Oh, they want relief all the time.
Well, they always want it.
It's very expensive, so, especially these days with, since COVID, with all of the supply chain issues, it's a lot more expensive. So the T5 was because we don't require as much, open space.
T5 UC is
And we
where,
require the building to be up against the street and all that, but it could be removed. I don't know why we have that in there. We just get rid of the T5. Any building. It's just an allowed thing. Why shouldn't they be able to do it?
Well, I guess because the T5 UC is a very dense.
Yeah, well, that's the
environment,
reason why, but.
And
I
you
don't
wouldn't
think
have the
it
room
hurts.
for trees that much, that's why. I don't know,
And I don't see why we would be mad if they save room for trees.
no, that's true.
I mean, as long as it's a may, I just didn't know the reason, and
That was.
but if it's a may, it means that we just don't have to do it, but. And probably more of a Benji thing, because he probably particularly,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if Paul comes in with
Great.
Paul comes in with his fancy development, right? And,
Yeah,
and,
this,
you know,
it could
it was
apply to our.
not.
We look at some trees, but when we get demonstration, because there are problems with that.
And this is, like I said, this is allowing you a reduction, so we can talk about.
I mean, maybe the place to deal with it is in the fenestration
I
section rather
agree.
than in the tree section.
I agree.
So we need to
That
make-
you might mitigate it by.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I think this was to
Yeah.
give you credit,
Or architecture.
this was just to give you extra credit, so that's all. Does that make sense? So you want-
Well, we know what it was doing. Yeah, I get it.
So you don't have to do it, it's just another tool.
No, I know.
So maybe you take that.
I think we just take it out of this section. We can deal with it when we get to fenestration. It's a good idea because it does help, I think.
So do you have like a list of keeping about things like that?
I've been putting notes on the previous one.
Okay, but you just took out your note that you put in there.
You wanna put a
Right.
note,
So we're putting it back then?
Yeah, leave the note that says move to fenestration.
Are we done with the trees?
Yeah,
You are
thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate it.
No, I like.
Send your bill to
I'm
Kurt.
gonna look up.
See that chart?
Throw an extra 10 minutes on it.
Can't say.
I do want to state that there's never, they never got a bill, they don't get bills for what I do.
I want to say that.
We appreciate
No,
it.
we,
I appreciate it.
Started with billing.
We're just joking.
I got a question on page 22. And, it's infrastructure. Just read that sentence. I think there's something missing there. The one that says utility companies, governmental agencies.
It's a rough on sentence.
There's no verb. That's.
I thought it when it was.
What are we supposed to say?
That's an existing code language, so.
I'm just saying, I just was reading all this stuff, and I thought there was something we need to fix out. Let me see.
Okay, I'll tell them.
I don't even know if we need if the applicable company or agency.
No.
But I just didn't, I was trying to figure out what we need there. What are we trying? Then we,
It's just a lead on to the rest of the paragraph.
yeah, but even then, it just doesn't tell us anything.
Yeah.
Is this about exemptions for infrastructure, like when it comes to tree protection, or
Well,
was it because?
you gotta go all the way back to.
It is
Yeah,
for
it's-
maintaining
Some of the tree.
power lines, et cetera.
It goes all the way back to. Holy cow. The following methods may be used to determine the tree canopy. No, that isn't it, that's. Wait a second, where is? That leads to another question.
Doesn't make sense there.
So 5.3.2 A is way back on 17. And then you get to the B on page 20, and then you get all the way down here to G, so it's I don't know what we're trying to do there. This must be a standalone something or other, but what is it?
Well, we have an E and an F,
Yeah.
so we skipped it somehow, I think E should be D maybe, or no, C.
No, we we just go from B to E, right?
Yeah.
So E should be C, F should be E, but we're still left with G being whatever that is. But I don't know.
G would be, that would be B. The infrastructure you're talking about?
Yeah, but we're trying to figure out, Kim, what is it telling us to do there?
Oh, what does E mean?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Is it saying that they just have to take the structure into account when they're calculating the canopy? If they're having to trim all
coverage with covers.
vegetation for.
I think it's basically exempting them from. Exempting infrastructure from the standards. I think that's basically what we're doing.
If there's an agreement in place.
Well, the whole thing needs to be rewritten, so it can, because it's not instructive right now of anything.
Yeah, it doesn't say that, but.
Yeah. And I did. We want to leave it to Nick there to figure it out.
Well, what if we said utility companies, governmental agencies and city agencies are exempt?
Yeah, the exemption's the next. We refer emergency or we just want to make that an exemption instead, infrastructure exemption, maybe? Would that make sense?
Well, with all the others, you have like tree replacement, the following standards shall apply to all, and they need something like that in front of utility.
Well, maybe what we're just saying is utility companies, all that shall execute an agreement with the city that, maybe that's what it all is.
Yes,
Is that what we're trying to do?
yeah, I think that's what.
Shall execute an agreement? Is that
I
it?
mean,
Kim?
maybe we call it instead of infrastructure, maybe we call it utility,
Utilities,
utility and agency exemption.
The city,
Well,
the city have the authority to require the utility company to sign such an agreement.
we can try to get away with it.
Some of them have.
I've never,
right?
I think the city's been trying to for a long time.
but maybe it should just say, whatever we title it, utilities, then it'll say utility companies and go through the list of the things. And then just say, within 12 months of the adoption of the code shall execute an agreement with the city that recognizes, establishes and provides. And then just do that.
Yeah.
Get rid of the exemption.
But I think we have to have the agency, what would be like, what about like something that was owned by the National Park Service?
Sure.
Would that be an agency?
Yeah, I think so. It's covered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they have claimed, because this came up on the little Freedman's cottage, that they are exempt from tree standards.
Why are they being tied to this 12 months after the date? It's not violation code. What's?
Yeah.
Well, we
don't
can even
think that
take
we
that,
have to
you
do
could say, whatever we said on.
But they if
No,
they
no, we can
executed
take
an
that on, you're
agreement.
right. No, you're right. Yeah, we just take the whole if the applicable company or agency, after television. Just take out after television, take out if the applicable all the way through the date. Adoption of the code, just say shall execute an agreement with the city that.
Yeah.
And then that gives authority to Kurt's team to. Try to get an agreement from these people, and if they say stuff it, then we can deal with it then.
Let's just hold that thought, Bill, because he's gonna make that change.
Okay, I think we should call it utilities and agency exemption.
But it isn't an exemption, it doesn't, it's not,
It's an exemption if you have an agreement.
no, we're just telling, no, right at this paragraph, all we're doing is just saying that.
You all execute an agreement.
We're just asking them to execute an agreement. Tell them they need to, that's all.
How is that not an exemption?
Well, I'm not gonna, if they're exempt by law, they're exempt by law, I guess, yeah, look down there.
I just wanna add that I think language saying it's an exemption creates a different, creates different expectations.
Yeah.
Versus the way that I think Bill is describing it of this is a requirement to enter into an agreement, and it could function as exemption, but I
Yeah,
don't wanna set the bar high.
I've spent a
I
lot
still
of
think
years
we
trying to argue that the utilities get away with murder. And they almost never tell you anything except vaguely that they're entitled to.
Okay,
I'm
so
not
I
going
think
there.
we need to take out the word infrastructure. Just call it utilities and agencies.
Yeah, that's fine. And then the rest of it. So you got that then after the word television, take out from the word if to the word has, and put the word shall in front of execute and change executed to execute. And then that'll be a very nice paragraph there. All right.
Yep, we got it.
We'll see what you guys can do to get the science agreements.
And I think the letter for that is E.
Yeah, well, the organizers, yeah.
Oh, this is a really good regulation now, I think.
I think it's actually.
Huh? I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. So I wanted to go to page 31, though I had a question.
Oh, I see.
A question on 31, sir. Will require your attention. You there with me, Kurt?
Yep.
So the heading which says front bumper requirements along major arterials. I'm not sure that all those roads that are listed there are major arterials.
Yeah, you're probably right.
I think only Robert Smalls and Paris Island Gateway. And Trask Parkway, probably, I'm not even sure Sam's Point Road is, but,
No, it's not a major. artery.
so I think we wanna take, but I'm betting they're. Well, I was gonna say some might be minor arterials, but I'm betting Salem Road isn't even a minor arterial, but I don't know.
What
I was just
page
wondering,
are
I
you
think
on?
it's
I'm sorry.
31.
Hold on,
Where
I think
does
we
it
already
say
switched it to
major?
major corridors.
Under the type B buffer.
I think I would take it, I'd get rid of major arterials and just call,
Oh, I see, when we did, yeah, you know what?
I just call,
Chris and I were talking about this and we just did it in the table, not the.
I just maybe just say buffer requirements and just take
No,
out along major arterials, just eliminate it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I agree with page 31.
And then in the language, in the paragraph right above, it's called
Major
personal boundaries that
thoroughfares.
abut major thoroughfares.
I just say, just take out the word major, or these streets, or these roads.
Yeah.
Maybe just these
These
roads,
roads. Yeah.
Go to page 31.
so nobody's gonna, yeah.
Yeah, and I have a question on that.
This is 31.
And I can't remember, why are we adding all these other roads?
There it is, there.
Requirements?
And just put it along major thoroughfare.
That's a good question.
You see arterials right there?
I'll have to ask her.
It says Corey.
It says front buffer requirements along major arterials.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I remember we talked about that. or along major corridors, you can put.
Should
It's up there, just. No.
The title, the title.
The title.
And then,
Put
it's-
major thoroughfare.
and then,
Is it
it's-
because we're
and then in
combining
this,
people?
just 1 second, and then in the sentence under it, Nick, where it says abut the major thoroughfares, just say abut these roads. Okay. But then Benji has a good question.
Yeah, so I was just wondering why we're adding all these kind of non-major arterial roads requiring buffers. Most of these, I think some of these are like single family.
A lot of it's single family. Particularly on Battery Creek Road and so forth where. You know, I'm not sure that the setback for the actual building jives with the buffer. Probably it does on the front.
I think just considering that these are the only major corridors that we have, and we'll keep growing maybe, but.
I mean, like,
Yeah, I think that's a good point with those, if you don't feel like it's
Well, it doesn't
necessary.
look like there's buffers for any of the ones that are added.
I mean, I do think Rebo and next, the one after it's Seattle Parkway, you should probably consider. Maybe Battery Creek, Salem, but you know, at the same time, Salem Road this is another way to maybe think about growth on Salem Road and some of these roads, Old Jericho, where. There's a lot of growth happening and, you know, adding a buffer kind of makes it more
I just,
difficult.
yeah, I feel like maybe this needs more study, like we need like an actual master plan. Or why are buffers? Private roads. Maybe they're like are we seeing this as more traffic area that needs a buffer, but I don't think we need to add them like this.
I think the distinction needs to be drawn between single family and multifamily and or commercial. You know, you don't want to require a 10-foot buffer in front of a single family house, do you? Do you?
Well, these are bigger than
On
10
the
feet.
main road, yeah.
I get it up here is. Well, let's see, type A.
What are the types? What are those?
Well, type A is, could be as small as 10.
You would,
But I
because,
Yeah,
that's not, you wouldn't want a
28,
single family. would
page
not be-
28.
I mean, you can see that down, what is it, 278
Oh, there.
in Bluffton, where they're building like, you know, they're doing that with the two Myrtle Beach, they're building like basically like huge, berms, because they're building like single family right up against 278 and it's. Because that's not really a good idea, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's fine like on those kinds of roads, but like Monte Oaks and Southside Boulevard, Battery Creek.
Maybe it's just a couple of these streets that are appropriate, like Southside Mossy, but
Yeah.
maybe Salem Road certainly might be, and
So there's options though. It's like type A, for example. You can either have a 20 feet that's more sparse with trees, or you can have 10 feet. It has, you know, it looks a little.
I mean, also with Salem Road, I think we're, and maybe even on Jericho, we're kind of at the point where there's so much traffic on it that we almost want to reserve space for future growth. And if we're gonna keep having T5 and T4, like, that doesn't work anymore. I'm just gonna be honest about it. It's not gonna work if we build that whole street out like we have.
which one you saying?
I mean, I think I'm just responding, this is just my, that's why I think I think I see Paul's point on like, Battery Creek. But I think I added to Salem and Old Jericho and Broad River, because we're seeing a lot of intense growth in like T4 and T5 districts, because we, for whatever reason, zone those T4 and T5. I can't explain why, but it's a 2-lane street that has tremendous amount of growth in the last 4 or 5 years, and if we put the buildings all up against the road, how are we gonna allow that road to grow?
We've got to have buffers.
Like-
There's no question.
You know what I mean?
It's just not safe not to have buffers there.
I mean, it's kind of,
Well, look,
Well, in effect, you do, you know, Salem Bay in effect has. buffer.
yeah, I mean, they have a buffer, but if, you know,
They didn't want to.
Apartment complexes have a buffer.
Yeah, they do, but that's because they decided to, but they,
But we're talking about requiring them to.
yeah.
And
And I don't know how they got approved that way, because they really weren't supposed to have those buffers, does that make sense? They were supposed to be built up against the street. There was, again, none of us were here, so. But. The senior housing is gonna be more up against the street though, so.
well, Salem Bay, you know, I mean, it's got a nice setback along there, but you sure as heck wouldn't want those houses just backing right up to Salem Road. That'd be awful, right? And without it, you're saying they could have done that?
Well, the code actually required
Would
required them to
Oh,
do it.
goodness.
I don't know, I don't know how the Salem Bay and I mean, the Garden Oaks should have put the buildings up against the street and they.
They don't, they
didn't.
behind.
So I don't know, I don't think they got a variance, they just didn't do it, so.
Well, you can see
Right.
that, you can see those apartments. that-
Definitely better than
on,
they didn't do it,
on
that's for
the
sure.
extension of, Burton Hill Road next to Lowe's, they're literally on the street.
They're right on the street.
Yeah, and they done appear to
It was
be,
like a.
I don't know if there's
Like you did with
be a buffer or not.
There isn't, well, yeah, I don't know if you can put one there.
Yeah.
Well, if we had this code provision, you'd have to.
Well, and that's why I'm a believer. in
Yeah, I
buffers.
think you're right. I think you're right. I was just concerned about, going down so much of Battery Creek Road or
Yeah, I
whatever is
think you could
already
delete that one.
existing and.
You could delete
know,
most of
just,
that one.
the nature of that, but new development should, you're correct, should have a buffer, particularly for multifamily, and really large scale tract developments like Salem Bay, which probably will happen on Old Jericho Road. That's probably what will happen going down the extension coming off of Salem.
And then Rebo Road is a question because, I think the county was trying to do
Well, I mean, there's not much on Rubo Road
yeah, it doesn't.
in
look like a buffer.
that's in the city of Beaufort that's undeveloped at this point. It's
No.
pretty much all.
Maybe that goes away too.
And a lot of that is zone T5UC anyway, right? So I mean, the code, so whatever happens there is gonna be encouraged to be built literally on the street.
Well, a lot of it's T4. Too, I mean, a lot of it's strictly
Yeah,
residential.
well, you can see on the map, you can see the dark purple, as you get by the hospital and stuff, it's all
Yeah.
T5.
Yeah.
If you remember the project you just approved, you allowed an exemption. Well, the MPC did, but then you continued it to allow the tree and green space. Because otherwise, all of those townhouses should have been built.
Right up on the street.
The street.
You're talking
Per
about the
code.
one next to the
Per code.
parking lot, that one.
Well, they should have been built, should have bulldozed all the oak trees along Rebo Road and put everything right up on the street. That's what the code said. Well, that is true.
I hear you. I know, I hear you. Um.
While on the buffer. I'm still not sure on the type, what was it, type E? I don't think it's changed with the left, which is with a 28 shrubs every 100 linear feet. And just it being 3 feet high, and 3 feet.
You're talking about option 100 feet?
Yeah, option 1, and I guess, option 2 as well. I think that, like, that should be a lot more.
So you got so option 1 is overstory every 25 feet basically. And then you come in with the understory every 20 feet.
But an evergreen, like a shrubs. So right now the code requires the shrubs and 25% coverage. And 20 every 100 linear feet is just about, when I threw it out, that's just about 10% covered.
Oh. So that's less.
And we're also using the term major arterials.
Yeah, we need to change the road, you know, all of those type buffers there.
We already did.
Well, I think they're gonna be more inside.
So if you compare, I'm just looking, Benji, if you compare type E buffer to type C buffer, both of them are described as medium density screening. And it looks like C is even less than E.
Right, yeah.
Only D is high density. Well, I mean,
I think E is supposed to be the most dense, you know, that's the one on Robert's.
Yeah.
E's the most dense, then D is the next most dense.
okay, but it's described as medium density screening in the description in the gray box.
So that should probably be high dense.
Yeah, that should be.
Oh,
So you guys got it.
It's, no, I think it's actually correct because we got this from Hilton Head. And I think the goal here is that that's more of like a commercial buffer area, so. We found that like the Walmarts and they don't really want all of the undergrowth. Because people live there and it's hard to maintain and then you can't see anything. You can't see the.
Actually, if you look at buffer, type D is denser than
Yeah,
type E. The E is actually a less dense planting pattern than D. Because if you look at D, option 1, you've got for a 30-foot depth, you've got already the 25 evergreen shrubs, and in E, you've got that on option number 2, but that's a 30, 35. So you know what I'm saying? It's kind of weird. Yeah.
I mean, are we wanting to have less vegetation? Then, because I thought we started this because we wanted more screening.
And, you know, that goes to the width of the buffers as well. As we have seen, 20 and 30 feet is not that many feet when you're looking at it from the road. You know, the famous 50-foot buffer.
So, yeah, this is kind of peculiar. So just look at what you apply it to. You've got the Robert Smalls from Paris Island Gateway to Broad River, that's out in an area where there isn't as much development. So that's probably got more opportunity for development just because it's further out than from Robert Smalls from Paris Island Gateway to Boundary. So in the type E, we've got narrower buffers, but we got more stuff within the buffer. And the other one, we've got broader ones. So there's actually more opportunity to plant in a wider buffer.
Or leave things.
So
I'm not sure that's true. I just went to Cary, North Carolina this past weekend and I've noticed in particular, it's gorgeous there. It really is.
Yeah.
They've done a great job. Their buffers aren't so deep. They're very thickly planted.
yeah,
And they've used all kinds of hollies and that sort of thing that get big and they accomplish the goal of making it opaque. It really is.
Is this like a new construction or?
Well, it's been there a long time.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
all-
and, you know, and Walmart and everything else is pretty well covered up, so they'll do
and
it.
I like that. I think what I was saying is just that D is, you got a narrower buffer with more planting than E, which is a wider buffer with less planting. And
Yeah, right.
yet E applies to areas that probably have more opportunity for
Yeah, you're right.
bigger buffers and stuff, because it's further out a little bit further.
So you wanna look at each
I don't know.
roadway and decide. what you
I
is
think
important.
type D provides you more opacity than E, but then E is like the buffer in front of Walmart. That's like your 50 foot buffer.
It's larger.
It's larger, but it's less dense, and that's
Yeah, I think
exactly
our
what
thought
they
was that
want.
you could, so you can see it.
Yeah, they want,
Somewhat.
exactly.
Well, I've always,
seen
what-
that.
ever since I first came down here, I always thought that was one of the more remarkable buffering plans that we've done in this community, which is we completely blocked anyone from having to look at a Walmart. I mean, let's face it, everybody knows it's there.
And that was because of John Gray. I mean, that was a private covenant, that wasn't.
And he just wanted to do it.
He just demanded that they do it.
Well, that's good for him, because I mean, it's
Yeah, I thought that was how it should be. I
Yeah.
thought that's what the code was trying to do.
is to try to cover
And
the,
supposedly that was supposed to be what Beaufort Station had.
Yeah.
which
Because, I
it
mean,
isn't.
yeah.
because of the Walmarts, all they need is, I mean, they don't really need any signage, anything. Once they're there, everybody knows where they are. It's the little retailers that need to be seen. a
Well,
little
especially
bit.
in the area here, there's
Yeah,
such a lack
right.
of shopping. Everybody has to go to Walmart, whether they like it or not.
And nowadays, you know, if you just plug in, if you wanna go to Starbucks somewhere, you just plug it in and it'll drive you right there, so I mean.
Well, that's probably the way most of us do, but yeah, but the theory is that smaller retailers need a little more visibility than big retailers, but none of them want.
Is it possible to specify a certain degree of, you know, opacity and leave it to the, you know, rather than specify the depth of the buffer and just say, you gotta make it, you gotta have a landscape design that creates this degree of opacity, and it's up to you. You can then adjust your depth accordingly. Is that,
Well, I think the broader thing,
No,
I think
no.
Mike came up with this,
I
you want, the bigger topic with this, with the depth was cheap. Form-based codes having the buildings go up against the street.
Yeah.
And this was a way to basically create a buffer to that
Yeah,
on these major streets, because
Okay.
I think you identified that that hasn't been working very well.
We need
How about the
6
issue-
offensive buffers.
That was the goal.
Or you mentioned the issue of people living in the buffers or living in the woods. At what level of coverage is that a concern? Is it the really thick buffers or? is it-
Yeah, it's the big buffers.
Okay.
Yeah, they, actually, Nicholas and Christopher were out on a few of these cases for the other.
Poor
There's a lot of
guys.
homeless out on some of these
Hope you bring
buffer areas.
Armed assistance with you when you do.
Walmart requested more trees to be cut down because of the homelessness issue in front of the store there. And we said, well, yeah, we kind of marked some trees up that we could, but we said, you have to mitigate that though. You have to put in some new groupings of maybe palmetto trees and some nice looking. You don't have to spread it out, you can do groupings, right? Well, they weren't interested in replanting, so they just forget it, we're not
Mr.
doing it,
Murphy,
but
too.
we noticed though that they have cut down trees without us letting
They
us
seem to have
know,
a
because
trouble keeping their landscaping alive. You're talking about the Walmart,
Robert's Falls Park.
yeah, I noticed a lot of dead landscaping.
The Walmart manager never comes outside the store, and nobody else affiliated with Walmart will ever check the site. I'm just telling you,
they don't care.
they do not care. And have no intention of caring. You know, that's not their business model.
Well, vegetation and home
I know that from fact.
occupation are two separate, totally separate items.
Well, but it's a problem in our community.
It may be a problem, but it needs to be dealt with in a different way than through vegetation.
You know, like maybe have a homeless shelter, you know, that would be it. One that men can go to. Yeah.
Well, anyway, I think that, so there's, the depth was because of mitigating the form-based code, if you remember. Now, whether I think to Benji's point, you know, whether the amount that should be planted, I think that's up to you. Do you want to look at all these, you know, again, you're looking at depth because you could pick either one, you either pick the,
Isn't this the Bluffton model?
this is the Hilton Head model.
I mean, rather than.
They're kind of-
They're kind of, I mean,
They're kind of the golden ticket for.
So if you got all of these from there, I don't have a problem with them. It may just be the question of which streets they apply to, but
That's right.
maybe.
Yeah, and I think
maybe
that's,
Someone like Ben, you'd have a better idea which to help you on that.
Yes.
well, obviously the code was trying to recreate that model in our code.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it was successful because we were all confused. So I'm confused trying to regulate it and confusing Anyway, so.
Maybe you're suggesting, Kurt, that we go down the list and.
Yeah, just go down the list of the roads. So I think you see the buffer, I think we've identified that. They have varying widths. The widths are based on either you plant more, you plant less. If you plant less, you have a. You have a bigger buffer area. If you plant more, you have a smaller buffer area.
So D is the thickest. So
D is
I
the
would think,
thickest, however, it's not the,
widest.
does not have the most depth.
Yeah.
maybe type E for Robert Smalls should be type D.
Well, and the thought was you want buildings up against the street in Roberts Falls, and that's why we picked site.
Yeah, but not from Paris Island Gateway to Broad River Bridge.
Yeah, I think that one's fine.
Let's just go down to the table. Why don't you just talk about each one of them?
I think that would be the wider zone.
But
So
there
it used to
is
be
none that
50
has
feet.
50.
So we're saying it could be 50 or what,
Yeah,
35?
type E does have a 50-foot.
Well, is the buffer in front of that apartment complex just down from the new Aldi on the right, is that sufficient?
I mean, that was pretty me too, but I think so. I think so. I think they probably cleared it all out, probably without.
But what they put back, is that sufficient?
It doesn't match this.
Probably not, but
It doesn't even
it
look
probably
like
has
it's
the
up there.
depth, right?
I don't
So
think-
other developments, as you go farther down, you know, the school, for example, is back in there on the left.
Right.
That entire development, the huge development, off to the right, what's it called?
4,000 Margaret.
Well, no, not the apartment, but the single family,
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
what's it called? Then you go down a little farther and you got another apartment complex to the left that's way up in the woods and it's fine. So, yeah, it looks pretty rural out there for the most part. It's just,
I mean, could we treat the buffer as like, you can't touch it at all, almost like a, a critical line type?
Well, that's what it is.
You mean no clearing at all during
Like you
construction?
can touch it, I mean, except for where you curb cut and big driveways and stuff.
well, now they've done that pretty much around that Publix at the traffic circle down there in Bluffton, for example. And it really looks terrible, frankly. I mean, it's not manicured at all. And it almost looks better if you have some cutting down below, you know, and at least it looks maintained, because right now it's just like, it looks bad.
Well, you were talking about that with the
It has an
Well, what's
existing vegetation.
Ladies Island, the new development in Ladies Island, just across the bridge, there's areas that just look really junky.
Whitehall?
The stuff that's right on Sea Island.
Yeah, right there, yeah. I mean, it's very ill maintained. I mean,
Exactly.
Right.
And Walmart is another, the Ladies Island Walmart is another horror story when it comes to that.
I mean, a little, you can have your understory, but if you don't bush hog, you know, or, maintain it in and around all that, it's just a degree of, you know, your hollies and the other shrubs that you plant in there that you want to thrive and get bigger, you still need to be able to cut in and around them, it seems to me. I'm not a fan of the total natural look of just the pine trees and all the vines and everything that go up in them. I'm not so sure that really. So what John Gray was trying to accomplish, in theory, okay, he's trying to create a real buffer. And when they bush hogged around the old Walmart on that side, you know, and around over there, you know, maybe they cut it a little bit too much, but I don't know that it's any worse than what it used to be, because I mean, it was just like not maintained at all. Neither was Beaufort Station, for that matter. I mean, they had all those old vines just coming down out of the trees. That didn't look particularly great. I don't know what the answer is. But au naturel completely is, I don't think the answer.
Yeah, no, definitely, at least like pruning to make it.
Yeah.
And pick up the dead ones that fall over and that kind of thing.
Well, I think the next page kind of talks about this maintenance and existing vegetation, the buffer has existing trees that should be preserved, part of the existing tree. Just maybe shrubs are present, that's right. Or, does that make sense?
So as far as Robert Smalls from Paris Island Gateway to Broad River Bridge, I'd suggest we change that to type D. Does anybody disagree with that? Yes,
So that'll make a not as wide buffer area, that's why I think we picked E, because
Yeah.
it's 50 feet.
Maybe keep the width, but maybe, transfer the 6 foot high maturity to it.
so create a new category,
No, that's just change E. So that the height is 6 feet for the shrubs. And the number
so,
Just take the evergreen shrubs and the other
would
section.
be like 25 or 30.
so for both option 1 and 2, change 3 to 6.
How about evergreen 25 every linear feet and at least 6 feet high at maturity? Does that work?
How about 30? And then 6 feet.
You're tough.
Well, and I think the idea behind the 50-foot depth not requiring as much density is because it's 50 feet.
Yeah, it's because it's
There's
50.
more,
So,
you know, line of sight
there's
to,
also more opportunities for them to group it just on one side of that, you know.
Which is kind of what they've done in front of those apartments down there.
Yeah.
They kind of bunched it up and then,
Yeah,
yeah.
so we can see through it. And maybe there's like some kind of verbiage.
So should the
that's-
30 be on the option 2 or 35 feet, and then maybe just keep that at 25? Option 1. See, because it would be denser. Option 2. Yeah, option 2, I mean, option 2 should be the denser one.
That's fine, yeah, but change it to 6 feet
One should
high.
be the less pace.
I mean, yeah, I mean, that's better than.
Put 30 there, and then the one before it, just maybe.
It's 20 now, so 25.
B6?
Or you could even go to 35 on the 35-foot depth on option 2, seems to be.
Yeah.
So you've gone up 10 in each case.
I mean, that feels better to me, I think.
I agree, and I think changing to a minimum 6-foot maturity height. And then evergreen. Yeah,
Then we need to go through the other buffers.
we should look at the other ones, yes.
Okay, so those are 6 feet, those are 6 feet. 5.
So it's still the same 5 per 100 on the overstory. Understory,
And then would the wall be on the street side or after the buffer? Is that specified?
Unspecified.
I mean, the 30-foot, why was the 30-foot buffer really any different from the 35-foot buffer in the type E? I mean, really, it ought to. You know, why not just have the same thing?
Let me just get rid of the type D buffer.
well, I mean, I think with type D, like just reading the description, it seems like the intent is for more kind of urban roadways, specifically with this visual contact with the height of 6 feet. Whereas if you read the type B, it says it's designed to define green corridors along major,
Yeah,
change to roadways. Is it accomplishing that? I'm sure.
I'm just saying that option 2 at 35 feet of depth is just so similar. You know, you might as well just have perhaps
Just mark it up the same as,
is
Type
option,
1E.
yeah,
just mark it up the same. So that's what you're saying.
that's what I'm trying to say, yes.
You'll do 30, right? Is that what you're? talking about, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see a big distinction. I mean, yeah.
So basically copy option 1 of type D to option 2 in type E, sort of like that.
If that gets the job done, of course, you got another extra, you've got more specimens in, yeah, you got more specimens in,
No, just on option one, type D. Change the evergreen shrubs to the 35 that you have in the other one. And you keep the 6 feet high. And everything else is probably okay.
And you're on option D?
Yeah, D1.
Okay, I'm right. And so the solid evergreen hedge, at least 6 feet high and 3 feet wide, is that, do we want a numerical value for the number of shrubs that makes a solid wall?
You can talk about option 2 now.
Yeah,
Okay.
You do that? That, that solid wall or fence runs how? Then what are we talking,
6 feet high,
but what's the length of it?
3 feet wide.
It's not the entire length of the,
No, it shows the entire length on this.
well, there's a wall or there's a hedge.
Yeah, it says wall or,
you want a 6 foot wall or hedge that runs the entire length of the front perimeter of a property?
yeah, I'm not sure if we want a wall.
Or you can
That
have,
doesn't make any sense.
the picture shows a combination.
Yeah.
You know, like wall, hedge, wall, hedge.
I mean,
Yes, it does.
six. I don't think you're talking, if you're talking about continuously along the entire length of the property, 6 feet high hedge. That's I don't know, that's an awfully high hedge. In most places, you can't have fences in the front yard. Anyway, that you wouldn't want them. I don't get this.
Yeah, I'm not really liking the idea of requiring wall or fence and buffer.
I mean, when we get, there's another section that we're coming upon soon, which is 5.4.4, which is screening of parking lots. Which is, when we get to that, I got a whole different question on that. Is that in addition to this? I didn't think that this was supposed to be, I mean, I like the ideas of 3 foot hedges or even 4 foot to cover parking. But you don't, that's all you're looking for. You're not looking to,
I don't have a problem with an evergreen hedge, but a fence is probably inappropriate.
Yeah.
A wall might work if you put fig vine or something on it.
yeah, but 6 foot high in a front yard. I've never heard of such.
Well, why don't we just get rid of it and use the evergreen shrub
Just take the wall or fence out.
and just increase the evergreen?
But even 6 foot is really high for, I don't know if you can get a continuous hedge 6 foot high, that's enormously high.
You wanna go
I
down
mean, you
to,
could, well, you
Yeah.
could with certain times.
Yeah.
You could.
Or even, you know,
I
leave by drainage.
wonder if we're missing the point. If you took this out of the Hilton Head standards. And everybody said, okay, Hilton Head's looks great. Well, these standards were developed based on specific properties and streets. And in order for us to understand this, we'd have to go and see what kind of streets and roadways
Right.
they're talking about for these, and then we can apply this
Yeah.
in a similar manner. Just revising these based on some streets that we picked out isn't gonna do the trick. If we're gonna use these standards, we have to figure out why they're being used and where they're being used, and then apply that to what we wanna do.
I
I mean,
also like the combination of a wall and a hedge, like it's
Well,
shown in the
They
picture.
do that, they do
That looks
that
better.
as, in subdivisions where you have an entry to a subdivision off a major street, you've got walls and hedges.
Yep.
And that's what they're doing. Now, we can't just apply that arbitrarily to something here that isn't the same kind of things. So somebody's got to go take a look at it, where, or get with them and figure out why each of these or how these each apply.
I think all of these are, the only thing that, I think they're generally very good. The only thing I said is the 6 foot was, when you're talking about 3s and 4s, you're talking about screening vehicles. And we should always try to screen vehicle or parking lots. There's nothing good about them. And I include in that car
Right,
dealerships.
and-
But,
And I understand all that.
but
what I-
6 foot is just too high.
But what I'm saying, if we're gonna use these standards, we ought to figure out what the applicability of each of these standards are to specific instances. And we're not really doing that right now.
Well, I think
All I'm
that's
saying
a
is I don't know that
good
6 foot in
goal.
any case is too high. That's all I'm saying.
Nicholas, can you get rid of the solids, everything edge thing? Let's just get rid of it. I don't think anybody, we have an agreement with that.
What did you say there?
The heads there, the wall. All right, well, let's go to the table where we have the. This was in our existing code. We were trying to provide clarity. You know, I know Hilton Head Bluff did have something like this, and then, so that's what we pulled it from, right? To provide more clarity, because right now it didn't make any sense, but we were doing something like it, right? We just had a general buffer standard with a different width per those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things, and then we added 1 or 2, and then we used their standards to give you a little variation. So that's what we did. And so I hear Mike's comment. I think that's a good comment, but so we already have this in the code. Is that something? Do we want to use this? Or you just want to keep it kind of the way it is? We can put it all back in and you're just doing the width. I mean, we can just take out the whole buffer thing that Hilton Head's done and then just go back to the broad.
No,
Other story.
I like what you've
I
done with
like
that.
that,
I
I
just-
like that, yeah.
I think we just need to, like, as an example, let's go back to Sam's Point Road. We talked about that before. You got type C. And I've heard all the comments back and forth. But here we've got a 25-foot and a 15-foot buffer. Now, the older 50s, 60s houses that have turned into businesses along Sam's Point Road, I'm not sure what their setback is. They're probably 20, 25 feet. But anything that new gets in there, if anything new is developed like it is being now, you're getting secondary. Do we want to keep that only 25 feet or do we want to move that back to, a D, or an E?
Well,
You know, that's,
we have this screen, so I mean, Nicholas could put on Google Maps and we could all just look at it.
well, that's all I'm saying is I think we need to be looking to the future. What's existing right now is probably not the direction we want to continue to go because Sam's Point Road has grown. It used to be a whole lot bigger buffer than it is now.
Yeah.
50 is a pretty wide buffer, so if you have an option where somebody can go to 50, 35, that would work. Sam's Point Road is probably a lot of properties without a lot of depth to them, so you can't necessarily have 50-foot buffer
And
and new developments there.
isn't a lot of Sam's Point Road basically 2-lane road?
Yeah, and so from Factory Creek Road down south, that's the area really that's where it's got all the older houses and that I think you're referring to. You know, right here, Buford Air Conditioning and down here to
They don't have
Miller
much
Drive,
depth.
that stretch right there. You know, is all those little older houses that have been converted to
Right.
businesses.
And they're gonna be reconverted sometime.
Maybe.
Well,
Well, in point of all, there's a lot of depth to those, so you can't require a buffer without a huge amount of depth, that's all.
Well, they got a pretty good bit of overstory all up and down when you look at this. I mean, it's there.
Yes.
I'm just saying the depth of the lot.
So what do you think the depth should be? You know, they are somewhat limited,
Yeah,
so.
it's probably different one.
I guess my question is always, what are we trying to accomplish?
I think we're trying to create a nice landscape thoroughfares where the vehicles in particular are screened. But nothing above the vehicles need to be screened. The rest of it just needs to be an aesthetic tree buffer. I mean,
And you're also addressing the form-based code, which is requiring, without this buffer, is requiring the buildings to go up against
Yeah, and
the
that's,
property line.
Go just a little farther north, Nick. Yeah.
You're doing both at the same time.
So here's where we get in, and on the left-hand side there, this is where you get into those existing houses. And,
Collins is.
you know, they're set back pretty far. They're probably at least 50 feet back. Let's keep going down if we can.
There's something right on this.
Yeah, that one's fairly close. That one's kind of set back and he's got some trees and, you know, it could be a little thicker, I guess.
Definitely. I mean, the new provision would require a lot more there.
Yeah.
All of these would require a lot more if
Yeah.
they were coming in again.
Well,
Yep.
the question is though, these houses will not remain there forever and eventually this area will be redeveloped in a much
Sure.
more denser
How
fashion.
deep are those lots? I mean, like,
Yeah, that's my point, is you,
are they 100-foot lots or are
At
they
least.
50-foot?
No, they're deep.
Okay,
Yeah.
well. I don't know. I mean, 100 feet isn't terribly deep, but if you have a 50-foot buffer, that's. a lot.
yeah, that makes a
Makes a
difference.
Well, the great thing about technology is we can find out right now.
So are we getting into the county?
But going to 25 to 35 foot buffer is,
Where does the city end?
Yeah, the city is just kind of on the intersection. For now.
You never know.
That's true.
Well, that's right.
So can we tell from that how deep the lots are? Well, some of them are a lot deeper than others.
Right, we can measure. That's measure just a specific line.
I guess does the county have a buffer?
Good question.
So for example, this one, just right here, this line.
Is the purple the only portion
But
that's in the city right now?
that's the site of your Kroger, your big new grocery store there, so that's deep all the way across. If you were referring to these, what are those little houses up there, which might be redeveloped, and if they came into the city farther up to the north, those are not gonna be as deep. Those, yeah, like 70, 72, 74 right there. What's the depth of those? Yeah, what's that?
That's probably 50.
200, okay, so they're fairly deep.
I guess all I'm saying is I wouldn't take the buffer any shorter than what those frontages are on the road now. And I think they're all at least 35 feet off.
Yes.
They've all got at least 35.
Somewhere in that range.
But, and you're talking about, Pat, on the inside of the utility pole, because that's pretty much the right of way line. So that's, yeah, so that's the right of way there. And
And
we're not talking about landscaping there, we're talking in addition to what exists in that,
In the buffer.
Yeah.
Okay.
in the,
so the way they have those
Right.
drawn, those lines, Nick.
Mhm.
So the road itself, is that white line the accurate depiction of the size of the roads that exist right now?
pretty much. So
And-
between the red dots, that's the right of way.
Okay, and so the road could get wider in the future
Right.
without
Right.
impinging on those lots?
Right.
Right.
Okay,
We've recommended type C, which is 25 or 15. Do you want to go to like a type D, which is a lot bigger, or a type E? Because
Yeah, I
this is a
say-
future development if the city annexes it.
I say yes, for 2 reasons. One is I don't want to see stuff pushed up against the road. I don't like that at all. But the other thing is those other houses are at least 35 feet back. If you have another developer come in there and do multifamily next door and it's out in front of that house, you're destroying that person's property.
So let's go to that chart, which is below. Let's change that
Jesse, did you have something? Or
to maybe D
somebody?
or C or E.
Yeah.
D.
think D.
Is there any other one of these that strikes everybody as a problem?
I was.
I recognize her.
I-
She's not here.
Personally,
I'm closer.
I think the Salem Bay or Old Jericho Road, like Broad River, those are, to me, that's like the biggest concern in the city for future growth right now, because that's all undeveloped lot, like wooded lots, and there's lots of development activity bouncing around in staff's offices. And I think that's, that's the corridor where all the uproar with the Beaver Station being clear cut, the apartment complexes galore. I think that's probably an important area to focus on strong buffers.
Yeah, if you have, because that's likely gonna be single family development back in there and
Well,
no.
Old Jericho is
more
like
farms.
both,
Gee.
and a Starbucks apparently.
Starbucks.
So what would you recommend for that area? D?
Right now at B, it's 15 or 20.
Yeah, it's one of the narrowest right now.
Yeah, I like the. Especially on Jericho.
Oh, again, so, and lot size, I think, is something to
Yeah, I don't know
consider.
what the lot sizes are.
Can you look at the lot size, Nick?
Is Old Jericho like is split by Robert Smalls Parkway, right? And I think the portion that Paul was talking about being single family is the the portion that's closer to.
On the south
Salem.
side of 170 back there, Old Salem Road really is what I'm referring to.
I think the other side, the other Salem Road is county. The one on the right-hand side.
There is some county.
Yeah, it's county
I
back
remember
there.
you guys approved apartments, the DRB approved apartments on Old Jericho, but they still haven't built.
But then the Old Jericho portion that's like in between, that cuts between Robert Smalls and Paris Island Gateway, like that little stretch is like a hot spot.
It's a hotspot, and then the county zone that all like high density too, why? Just like we zone all, I don't. But,
Well, I can see that's like C.
Yeah, so that area of T4N down in there, that's what I'm sort of referring to, is that area.
you see all that T5, pretty much all T5 everywhere there, that's just, I mean, that's a 5-story building up against the street, so. Just.
It is so boxed.
The lot size and stuff like that.
Which ones?
Those T4 ones down there? What about is the brown part, is that county?
Yeah, these here are not within the city.
Okay, but everything else we're looking at is within the city?
Yep, all these purple,
yeah.
light.
All the colored area is actually the city, so all the zoning districts are city zoning districts, so that's city.
So that large section in the lower left-hand corner, T4, what is is that all just one part?
That's one lot, yeah. that's
Okay.
one, yeah.
However, that is part of a development. They claim that they're a PUD, that the city
Oh,
illegally zoned it beforehand. They haven't been, it's got a lot of infrastructure issues, but when I first started here, the other side of your family was trying to develop it, and I think because they found out they had to lay a few miles of sewer line, they abandoned, and the respective developers have so far not moved forward.
It's a tough piece to work.
They were proposing high density residential. Multi-family, 600 units minimum. So,
so what is that purple stuff on to the south of Old Salem Road? There's like a purple thing, is that all one lot too? It's right here.
That's that is all Battery Point, that's Battery Point.
Okay, so that's already
That's already developed.
If you zoom in over to the Old Jericho Road portion that's in between Robert Smalls and Paris Island Gateway, that like little triangle area. What are those lots?
and then the county has them as like.
Is that one in the middle of the hotel?
Yeah.
And then the Starbucks is on the corner?
I haven't submitted anything officially yet, but we've had a lot of ERC.
This is gonna be a hotel in here, and a Starbucks
What's
here.
that little piece that's right above that?
This here?
That,
It's just someone's house.
It's a private residence, but like for Plainville residents, like how deep is that?
When you say, just curious, when you said it's gonna be,
Well,
are they,
it's not gonna be, but they're coming to the tomorrow's TRC meeting
Roughly.
with a conceptual, with a site plan and some traffic circulation plan. They wanna.
How much is?
That's the old Verizon building right there.
The Verizon is actually this one right here, but. So they're wanting, this is still one track, but they want to subdivide this little, the lot 5A out.
eventually they're gonna come back.
So this is they're proposing a Starbucks right here and a hotel in here, so.
Place.
There's eventually come here, this.
In terms of traffic circulation. Right.
Yeah, it's odd about that.
Seems like Starbucks picks the worst place.
Yeah. I think that was my first.
And Broad River is now getting, we have a,
Yeah.
if you remember, there was a table thing that went through, but they're still, in fact, they're trying to develop in the county, that big T4 parcel. I think Broad River is where developers are going next to
Yeah.
piece together properties to
Yeah.
build multifamilies. Should it be a 30-foot, a 50-foot? As you can see, it's all T5 and T4, so I mean, and the county is no different, it's all very high density. It's a lot of it's, especially like an African-American houses right there, community for the most part, that's just gotten sold off over the years.
I think a 50-foot buffer is pretty big for that area.
Yeah, so it's like a 30-foot kind of buffer.
I think 30 foot like type D, because that's kind of like the front setback from T to the ends anyway.
So right now, it's type B, which it's 25 or 15 feet.
The Walmart buffer, it's 100 feet, right, Christopher? For Roberts Falls Walmart at the front, measured it, was it 50?
I think it's 50.
That this would be, that's roughly what. 50
That's what's right.
So 30 feet, that's all good? We going with the type T?
I think type D.
Everybody
Where I'm
agreement?
looking forward to.
And we're talking Salem, Broad River, Old Jericho.
That's right.
I just can go back, I think we should get rid of that 6 foot, I just think that 6 foot is just too high.
Yeah.
It doesn't, I don't know what purpose it's at, I just take it back to 3 or 4. 4 is fine, I mean, 6 is just, I wouldn't have a fence in the front yard ever.
Yeah.
And I'd get it down to 4.
So just 4 foot solid evergreen hedge.
That's fine.
So you eliminate the option of having a wall and hedge combination? Because I actually think that looks better in some situations.
So we're saying 4 feet here?
I just wouldn't make it 6, I mean, 6 is.
I think vegetation and walls, fine.
As long as it's not 6 foot.
Okay,
Okay.
I'll go to the 4.
We'll go to 4 feet, but we'll allow them to do a combination. Is that fair?
We're getting rid of striking it again, so we're leaving it in again. So
Leaving it in and changing it to 4 foot.
Kurt, where are we to where you want to go?
Well, we're approaching the 4 o'clock hour.
Needs to be.
Let's let him finish this.
We can have, they can have a wall or fence. Or.
I think the goal is to, do we have a draft that we can revise tomorrow? Send, fix this up tomorrow, since almost all of it's in here, and send you with the packet, right? For you to actually recommend a vote.
I mean, at our meeting on Monday.
Yeah, on your meeting on Monday, and then I'll send chapter 8 too, just because I advertised it. And if you get time, you can talk about that, Jermaine. You don't have to.
We have much of an agenda for next week.
Yeah, the annexation has provided father-in-law's signature, but other than that, that's it.
For the barbecue.
well, supposedly, yeah.
I have one last thing.
I have a couple more.
So let's
So do we want to leave the solid wall and fence at 6 feet or also?
No,
reduce it to
everything's
4?
in 4.
Everything at 4?
Roll it into it.
And then go back down to that tip list.
Okay.
And I think everybody's agreed that like Salem, Broad, Old, and we probably should put Old Salem as well. Old Salem. Yeah, and then put type D.
So we're actually not using any of that.
And what about
Well,
the C on the
Rainbow Road has
parkway from
type A.
Wood Spring Bridge to
But I think we're getting rid of it.
Airport Junction, you wanna get rid of that? I mean, I think we all drive that all pretty much every day, and it doesn't really have a buffer area right now, so. Just wanna leave it for that one.
So we don't wanna have that, we don't wanna address that at all?
I don't
That
know,
whole
do you
section
wanna address it if the city keeps growing that way? None of those properties really have a buffer, so I guess it could be a good thing.
Well, I mean, you know, other things have gone in there, Taco Bell, you know.
They do have a
Wendy's.
buffer in front of Whitehall, there's a buffer.
Yes, that's true.
And type B is not a particularly onerous buffer,
No.
but what did we do with Rebo Road? Did we decide on that?
Well, we said that there are no undeveloped sections in
So
the
we're gonna
city,
just take
but
that whole box out?
yeah.
Well, do you want to?
I mean, I kind of,
Leave it.
Let's say the Maryland chicken, somebody buys that and wants to put something else there. We'd have to put a buffer.
What would prevent people from putting an apartment complex right up against the street? That's what you wanna prevent. So.
So
Yes.
that's the only type A buffer, and that's either 20 feet or 10 feet.
Maybe type A is not. We just need to get rid of type A.
No, we need to keep type A so that we don't have to, yeah.
You're forcing it.
I think you can leave Rebo Road in even though there'll be minimal, if any, development. There's no point in not.
Putting it in
Michael
there.
covered it.
Yeah, okay.
The same, just like we've done for Sea Island Parkway to keep it as a type B.
This is 20 or 10, I think that's reasonable.
I mean, it's, yeah,
So Battery Creek,
it's such a,
do we want that to be type A?
Battery Creek Road is just all essentially residential.
Yeah, we're just gonna move that.
Nothing there.
And South Side is, with the exception of all that acreage fronting the park, I mean, it's. You got a little bit of apartment development down in there, yeah, you do.
But they already have a setback.
They already do have setbacks in there and buffers in place. They tore it all down and rebuilt it though. I think you could still leave even South Side. Mossy Oaks does have some, redevelopment opportunities, I guess. I guess you could leave that in there adjacent to the school, all that area in there. I mean, it could be. The Keith family has a pretty large tract right in there.
Jesse, you're waving your hand.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just thinking as you're talking through different streets, am I reading the code edits correctly that buffer requirements and the different types are basically just limited to those streets that are being identified? So any street that's not identified on this chart would not have a buffer requirement. I think that's.
So what street are you thinking of, like, maybe,
Well-
this is supposed to be main drags, or sort of main drags.
I think it's. Maybe I'm just hyper focused on the Burton area because that's where I know there's a lot of growth, and I think. While the city's current jurisdiction doesn't extend down to Castle Rock Road. Castle Rock Road, Goathy Hill Road. Those are, I think Grover Hill Road, I think those are gonna become major corridors, given the development that's already been approved. Not all, some in the town of Port Royal, some in Beaver County. But just in terms of thinking ahead, it might be worthwhile to.
well, let me ask you, are some if part of a road is in the city, it would be appropriate to address it as though we would grow out it, but if none of a road is in the city, we can't address it. But if
Yeah.
part of a road is, I think you're right, we can, because otherwise, what happens is, you know, we get an annexation thing and we're thinking, well, we'll go ahead and annex it and.
And then you put the layer on, you know,
But we don't, but we won't move that fast.
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't even occur to us in the course of an annexation, probably to say, oh, we better change our code to add,
I
you know.
think that's why
Yeah.
annexation standards would be helpful.
Yeah.
because You could add it there.
Uh-huh.
But like, I'm pretty sure the city had a annexation and development request on County Shed Road.
We did,
Like, that's one road.
we
I'm
went
just-
through.
But there is some, you know, the city jurisdiction touches on County Shed Road, it touches on Goathy Hill Road.
Then I think we could do it, yeah, as long as we touch on that road. You know,
And that's Goathy Hills behind the Beaufort station where there's already another turnabout, so I think that's a pretty
So should we,
known future development area.
could we add a box saying, newly annexed properties? Something we can impose a buffer requirement?
I think that would be part of your annexation standards.
well, right now, when we do annexations, we don't put any,
There's no standards right
no,
now.
we just annex it or not.
But that is in our parking lot list of things that we have to address, correct?
Yes, it is. Mention. All is, you know, you won't have to do.
I think I mean,
I think just add some streets that,
you could really add Goathy to the list with
Yeah.
Old Jericho.
Sure.
It's kind of the same area.
yeah,
There you go. That would be fun. And then we resolve that.
Which others?
It's Castle Rock, does Castle
So,
Rock touch?
It doesn't look like it touches currently.
What's the other one?
County Shed, do we have anything on County Shed?
Yeah.
Let's go to.
Oh, is it? I
Bill
don't,
Penn.
What about the other quote, what is it, Kroger House? Kroger House?
I know that.
I feel like we need like a color coded map with like the streets all colored.
Is the whole length of Meridian in the city of Beaufort?
A lot of it
Or any
is,
of it?
a lot of it is, but it's very residential.
Okay, there's a country club there. That may not always stay that way, and
It
it's
is really
either
the
end.
only-
You've got one substantial tract that could be multifamily
Yeah.
at some point.
This is the only north-south other alternative connection on Ladies Island.
what is the zoning on that multifamily tract? It allows multifamily.
Where is
The
it?
county. Pretty much all of them.
All that right in there by Cole Drive and Hope Road right in there. Yeah, there's the tract I'm referring to right there above Orange Grove. And then you've got all these really.
They asked us if they could annex last.
We
fall.
had a request for annexation.
Well, you know, the other thing is you've got all of these properties on the riverside that could be subdivided. I mean, they're enormous. Someone could come in and subdivide some of that to do multifamily. I could see that happening, you know, easily.
Is that currently in the city or no?
It's not, but some of Meridian is, so you could regulate it.
I think we should note Meridian Road.
You wanna go back to the list there? What would you think, like a D, a C?
I think just cover.
Has to be at least C
Whether
if
they're in
not
the
D.
city or not.
All right,
Everything's
let's
already
do
set
D.
back.
How's that?
Where would we put it in that bottom box?
You're suggesting a C?
I'd say a D, but
A D?
That's where you put it.
Yeah,
Meridian Road.
We got an hour left. You think we're gonna be able to
No,
get the rest of it?
we'll get, I got a few more things and some other things.
The only problem with that the D has a 6 foot high wall, or does it?
No, we got
It's an award.
Good.
Is that where you work? Yeah, around there, somewhere around there.
Yeah, right, work quick.
You don't want the wall?
Nah.
Can we change that to 3 feet?
A lot of jokes could be made.
Well, if you have it 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, what does that mean?
3 feet wide is just for the evergreen.
It's the.
Oh,
it's-
for the evergreen hedge, yes.
Yeah. It's the depth of the hedge, mostly.
Do you think we're good with the buffers? Are you all good with it?
Should we stay on?
From what we've talked about, I think I'm okay with it. Probably should have studied a lot more.
Well, you can change your mind next week.
Can I ask a question relative to that, on page 33, where we talk about parking lot screening and landscaping? Now, this is, all other areas. So this is sort of a catch-all if you're not on one of these corridors, right? Or,
Yeah, it's for all parking lots.
Hmm?
You're talking about parking lot screening, or are you talking?
Yeah, parking lot screening, because usually,
Yeah,
because
it's for
often,
any parking area.
so a parking that is not on one of these corridors. This would be, this would be a sort of a lesser standard, it looks like to me.
That's
Is
right.
that right?
Mhm.
Okay, I just was trying to understand that, because I can't imagine it would be a greater standard than we were just talking about.
We need to clarify that, that the, corridor buffers control over the parking lot buffers.
Well, you'd have to do both, right? So
Right,
that's a
right.
front buffer, this is a buffer for your parking lot
So what if
screening.
your parking lot's on the front?
Well, it can't really be on the front because we're not.
Well, there sure are a lot of them.
Well, the code doesn't really allow you to put parking in front anymore.
But you have to have a liner building,
For any new development,
a useless liner.
even the RMX district. doesn't.
Unless it was something like an auto
For
dealership.
redevelopment.
But if it were an auto dealership these
Yeah.
days, the auto dealership building would be up front with cars in the rear. Would that be the pattern that would have to be developed under?
Wait a second, you're saying that under the new pattern, I mean, there's a couple new dealerships on, Robert Small's.
Yeah, like what
That
about
came
Butler
into place prior to the adoption of this, after the adoption of this code. Parking,
I don't know, I didn't know that, but, you know.
you know what,
Oh, but that new dealers came in after, you know, the code was approved, but like the code doesn't really allow parking even in the conventional districts in the front yard anymore.
Well, definitely the Jeep dealership came in after.
yeah, that one came in.
Yeah, the
That's
Jeep,
pretty
Jeep
new.
did for sure.
That's
And they got the cars in the front.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, as car dealers go, that's one of the better ones, because it actually isn't parking.
I mean,
right
like, we were
away.
talking about
It's
all
parking.
these things, I have no idea how a lot of them got approved, so I'm not gonna go on it.
A lot better than gold.
You go out on,
I'm glad I don't know.
what, Freedom Park, Independence Boulevard, Freedom, what's the one out there, you get off Arjun, you go toward the interstate, and we're now in the county.
That's just.
And the big Ford dealer, he just parks right up to the edge
Yeah,
of
they park
pavement,
literally to the, yeah.
literally the edge of pavement, they not only park, they park over the ditch and up.
Yep.
It's unbelievable what they're getting away with.
They do.
And that's rain, they're floating away now.
Oh, boy, I mean, it's just funny, it's just so,
It is unbelievable.
it's it is so in your face, but anyways.
Always the last.
Yeah.
So then I just have a question on 32,
Like 75, 32.
where it says D development within the street. There's a sentence there that just says the following activities may occur in required buffers unless expressly prohibited elsewhere in their permits. I was just gonna suggest, although it's not a big deal, so it would be unless expressly prohibited elsewhere in this ordinance or by the planning commission as part of an approved site plan. Cause it's possible that as part of the site plan, we just might be more restrictive, that's all I'm saying.
Is that,
I missed what he's.
do we have the authority to just forget about the buffers?
Not to forget about it, I'm talking about that we might impose a greater requirement, because I think that the way that our code is written, we have the ability to do just about anything.
I didn't hear what he said.
You're saying that,
On D at the end of it, where it says the following activities may occur in required buffers unless expressly prohibited elsewhere in this ordinance, or we say it's saying unless expressly prohibited elsewhere in this ordinance or by the planning commission as a part of approved site plan. In other words, what I'm saying is if we expressly prohibit it, then that's, I don't want to give the guy this to think that they're allowed it because
Yeah.
in contravention of what we might say. You know what I'm saying? So, or by the planning commission as part of an approved capital site complete plan. That's all. If there's anything else that I have to-
I have one I don't understand on page 50,
The very last
you're
page.
moving us along.
2B.
Or not.
Is interior side rear setback of a conventional district 8 feet in height. And then there's the number 6 period. Interior side or rear setback. LI 10 feet in height. Anybody know what that is? Or what that sentence should be?
Take something out. That's it, this probably should be out completely. That whole sentence.
C? Yeah, I think it's a C.
Is, I mean, it's either gonna
It's a
be,
C to allow you to have a 10-foot high fence on a.
oh, that's in,
industrial
like,
That's
industrial,
supposed to be C.
Okay.
That's an error.
yeah.
It's a good catch.
Got us page 50, Bill.
So there's a page following page 50. Is that supposed to be something?
Oh, those are the parking.
Oh, okay, so that's just for information, okay.
So let me just ask about the side and rear requirements, so I understand it.
What page?
That's on page 33. Yeah, well, I think everything we've been talking about has been pretty important. Am I understanding this, that now we go back to those same buffers that we were just talking about?
Yeah, but these are the side and rear buffer.
No, I know it, but so we just spent a lot of time on these front buffers, because we can visualize it along all these roads. Are we ready to say that these are gonna be the side and rear buffers in all of these things? I'm just wondering if, because I don't think we've given any thought to that.
These are the same types.
These are the same types of buffers, but I mean, we just spent a whole lot of time thinking about what should be at the front. But this chart just says those same buffers that we've just spent all this time thinking about. Now we're gonna require them as well on sides and rears. And
In adjacent district.
I know.
settings, so maybe that needs to be better explained.
And do we want the depth? to
I
be
mean,
the
yeah,
same?
because all of those things, we. Just by way of example, I mean. You know, there might be situations where we need bigger.
So let's just go through them all. So
Rear side.
No, I
When you got-
understand what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
Light industrialists would be 50 foot or 35 foot if you were next to, like, let's say it was Benji's house. Next to a light industrial, you know, his house was there and then you build a light industrial district, they'd have to do a 35 or a 50.
But this is, so hang on a second, so this is the thing is,
Yeah.
it's what, just hang with me for a second, it's because our district includes a lot of stuff in it. And a 3 or 4 story apartment building next to a residential community requires a much bigger thing than if somebody builds another single family development next to it. So the problem with talking about zoning districts versus zoning districts is it really needs to come down to the kind of use that you have as setting forth the kind of buffer, you know? And don't you see what I'm saying?
Well, it looks like I mean, T4N and T4NA have typing buffers at the rear and the side, which are the skinniest and,
But a T4N could have an apartment complex in it.
okay.
And that would be different than if you put a single family subdivision of branch or 1-story homes, you know.
Could also be a T4.
Right, that's my point. And I think we need to give some thought to this whole thing about, because it's really the uses that can create the incompatibility, not the districts.
You know what, Christopher, I think I was thinking T3, it's like, let's district a proposed development, see how I got T4N. I think that needed to be added to. This type D, I think that's the error, right? You see that T3, I think that was meant to be type A, and then T4 is the reverse.
I think the whole thing is wrong, is what I'm saying.
I think you might be right.
I think if, for example, if you have 2 single family subdivisions next to each other, you might not need any buffer between them at all, except that, you know, a rear yard next to a rear yard of 2 single family homes doesn't require any buffer. But an apartment complex next to a single family home might require a 50-foot without a 6-foot high fence. Right?
So, yeah, so maybe the T4 and the T5 you see, and we take adjacent use would be T3 or any county residential.
I think I gotta rewrite the whole chart.
And then that's probably just type D. Because that could be an apartment. And then
And do we want to put the language in there that we can grant exceptions? Increasing or decreasing?
So, I mean, to what Bill was saying, so they'll need a buffer even if it's 2 single family.
You don't. Can we do a chart here that's based on uses? You know,
well, that's what it is, it's use or just use.
yeah, but I'm,
Well, it's hard to do the uses because they allow T4 and T5, you allow like every use.
Basically,
that's the problem. That's what I'm getting, that's what I'm getting
I
at.
don't know how to do that. So,
But, I mean, T4 is naturally supposed to be next to T3, so why would it need a buffer?
yeah, I think that's the way I'm confusing, but T4 is the district of proposed use. So maybe the T3 wouldn't really need the buffer.
Yeah,
If you're
T4
proposing
would-
T3, it wouldn't maybe need the buffer between T4N and T5, you see type D, but if they're proposing T4N to T3, then you need a big buffer. I think that's what Bill was talking about.
What if we change the middle column to just refer to uses? So like for light industrial, and then the next thing would be any use, type D. RMX, residential use, blank, you know, apartment complex, blank. you know,
Yeah,
something
that's,
like
that's
that.
probably, I mean, that's what we're concerned about, right?
So don't refer to districts in the second column, refer to uses only.
That's smart.
That might be this thing, let me look at it.
Then you would specify.
If the RMX is a residential use, next to a residential use. That won't really necessarily need a buffer. If it's like both multifamily.
But we need to divide that up. If RMX is next to, private residence, it needs one kind of buffer. If it's next to another, mixed use, it needs a different kind of buffer.
Well, I think that we need to also define the proposed use, so not a district, but if the proposed use is industrial next to any, or like industrial or commercial next to residential, something like that, maybe.
The only problem being is that can change, right? So you got the T4 or the T5. Right, you can turn it into something
Exactly.
This
else.
is going to be a bigger chart if we divide it up a little bit, which it should be, I think.
Well, let's think about this, is, apart from, when you really, when it comes to the rears and the sides, you're really trying to protect residential properties from non-residential properties. That's different than the corridors. In the corridors, we're trying to provide aesthetics and things like that. So,
I think that was the original intent of the code, but I think,
so
I
maybe,
think we both kind of saw the issue with apartments and 4 and 5 story buildings.
But what-
I thought this could be a way to.
but what if we just said,
Maybe this is way too.
what if we just, yeah, what if we just talked in terms of any time that a proposed use is adjoining a residential property, it'll require a buffer of a certain kind. And then what we have to do is just identify what that buffer is. And maybe that the part of it is related to the height of the incompatibility. So, you know,
Like those folks with the little houses around the, thing we just approved.
So the-
Greenville Road, I mean, if there was a big buffer, they might have been a lot happier.
yeah, so the taller the the secondary use is that comes to it, the more the setback and the higher the screen. Something like that, you know, so if it's 1 story, it's not so as important as a 1 story to 2 story, 1 story to 3 story, 1 story to 4 story, right? And you're getting a lot of apartments these days with that are 4, I think a lot of them are 4 story,
They
aren't
can
they?
go up to
4 and
5.
5 stories.
Huh?
Yeah, 4
Maybe
and 5 stories.
5?
Yeah,
Point grade.
They can,
Yeah,
they can.
yeah.
The other half are 4 story.
And so then we gotta have a much deeper buffer and higher screen, and in some of those cases, we're gonna maybe even wanna. You know, a required fence of some height.
So basically what we're trying to protect with these are single family residences or small little townhome type things with maybe 2 or 3 put together, right?
So you just wanna put single family residential across the whole middle and then come up with the buffer type?
Unless there's also some small, 2-story apartments that you wanna protect.
Well, I think where
From
industrial and RMX, you would wanna have some buffer from that, from apartments too, right?
Well, you're protecting the higher, the apartments from the industrial probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think from apartments from industrial, that would make some sense, right?
Yeah.
But otherwise, most of.
I think we'd be buffering all residential, right?
Well, I don't think you want to buffer apartments from apartments.
No, I mean, I'm saying all residential from non-residential. That's the buffer that you're really looking for, isn't it? Protecting residential properties from non-residential.
Yeah, but the problem is,
Single story residence.
But no, I'm just saying,
Single family home.
I'm saying protect all residential from non-residential, but single family deserves a higher level of protection, obviously, than tall apartment buildings. Cause I mean, there's only so much you can do to protect that, to screen up a tall
Or if
apartment.
it's like a mixed use type development, like how.
Well, well, that's a good point. So if somebody comes in with mixed use, they might be exempt from the whole thing.
Well,
you-
except on the edge that it's next to the single family home.
Well, always that, but he's saying like if somebody comes in with multifamily development with an internal commercial component.
Yeah, they don't necessarily.
Yeah, they don't, and that's sort of, Whitehall's got some of that in there. Cause there is some, they haven't built the commercial yet.
Is this the kind of thing that can be left to the discretion of the planning commission when approving a site plan?
Well, we're,
Side and rear.
so this goes to a point that I've made a million times, well, let me just say this.
We tried this on the last one, we were there at Oak Haven.
But let me just mention this, is that this is the way I've always viewed codes and site plan reviews when you have a high degree of discretion, which I think we do by virtue of some of the language I can refer you to if you want. Is the code is like the base level. And the discretionary site plan review is a higher level, meaning we can always increase the mitigation measures in a site plan review. But I think we should still have a base level within the code. I can't, and that's why I'm getting at here.
Can you have a minimum, can you choose one of these buffers that seems appropriate for a side and rear buffer? And have that as a set standard? But
Yeah,
then allow a degree of discretion.
right, we already have that, so all I'm saying, yeah, and the only thing I was bringing up here was that I don't think that the reference to zoning districts I think it's the reference to the residential. Yeah, we just described, we just picked the level of the buffer, we can use the same buffers,
You could default to the 50-foot buffer
yeah.
in the code and then permit a degree, depending on the nature of the proposed adjoining use in the site plan review. You could allow the planning commission a degree of leniency. So if you default to the larger buffer anyway, where you're gonna adjoin single family housing, you're gonna already have a 50-foot buffer set. And then allow the planning commission a degree if the developer comes in and says, okay, yeah, we're gonna do this and that, then maybe at the discretion of the planning commission, you could diminish that buffer somewhat.
Yeah, I wouldn't have any buffer between single family and single family,
No.
but I would have it between any other residential and a non-residential use.
How about if we didn't use a chart then, and we just say, the planning commission may impose buffer requirements in situations where different uses adjoin.
I would have a minimum
Actually,
standard.
your statement before, could we just take adjacent use and put single family residential and then apartments with the LI? And then have the buffer type and then, like the T3,
Get rid of the
there
whole,
would be no buffer to the single, because that's the concern, right? And occasionally for a multifamily. And so then you've solved it and then we just put the buffer type. Does that make sense?
okay, well, read this damn thing.
I like that idea, but I think we need to be, the uses we're trying to protect, single family residences. And,
Why can't we just say that all, I could probably come up with a sentence here in a second, but the basic idea is all residential developments. We're trying to say is all residential developments. Will have a required rear and side buffer. Where the adjoining use. Is. Other than that same. Residential type.
Or you could say all non-residential or mixed-use developments will have a required rear and side buffer where adjoining a single-family use.
that's, I think, the better way to
That's
put
the
it.
basic, I don't see that much. That's the
It
basic
shall have
idea.
a type D buffer. Maybe? I'll have and then you define what the buffer is. So,
Well-
Type D unless a different buffer requirement
Unless-
is imposed by the planning.
Yeah, but it's actually further because sometimes here's the other thing, sometimes the residential thing's gonna come in after, for example, the industrial. And we need to, in that event.
Well, then
the
they can
buffer-
build their own buffer. I mean, if they.
No, but we
decide-
wanna, we do want to have a buffer for residential, even if it's the second use coming in after the already established use.
But I don't know that, I mean, that's up to them. If they want to build their house with no
No,
buffer
that-
next to light industrial.
No, we're not talking about a single family house, we're talking
Okay.
about developments here, and I just tell you that. I've been in these situations, I remember more than once where we were doing a residential development next to an industrial. And they didn't propose any buffers, and it's the planning commission's responsibility to ensure that the people that live there have a buffer. And the industrial people in those cases, I've had them where they object because they say you're bringing, we're the nuisance and you're bringing somebody else and imposing it on us.
Well, this sentence, I think that you just created is a simple solution to a buffer. Imagine this
read it out
complex
loud?
problem that you asked me.
Let me see it. Get rid of the chart. All residents are required rear and side buffer where adjoining use is other, this is the one I gave, that one there, and then.
No, I think the second one is the better one.
Well, let me see, all non-residential. No, but I'm saying, but you can't impose it on the non-residential development if the use that we're reviewing is the residential one. Because then
Yeah.
non-residential is already there, so it might take, well. So,
So I'm typing adjoining a residential use.
all non-residential shall have a,
Adjoining a residential use.
No, after
Or maybe you say.
all non-residential mixed use development adjoining.
Non-residential.
For residential use.
you want to refer to the rear and side yards, right?
Rear and side yard type D buffer, yeah.
But I think we need to also provide keep that first sentence as well.
Yeah.
But you can put the kind of buffer you want in there. I mean, maybe it's the same darn buffer.
Type B.
Well, it's not will, but it's shall.
Shall, yeah.
Shall have a required rear and side buffer of. Or maybe
Yeah.
shall have a type, whatever type.
Type
Type
D
D.
unless another one's imposed by the planning commission, same as the other one.
So here's a question. What if it's like a duplex next to a single family?
But I couldn't hear you, Benji.
Like just a duplex next to a. Is
Well,
that, would that be a different?
Shouldn't really be a buffer then,
I don't
really.
think so.
Well,
Yeah.
but like in T4, like on Rebo Road, there's infill allowed for duplexes. You've got one of those big long lots there and you want to put a duplex, you only do one per block. But I think that should be treated the same as single family.
Yeah, so maybe you like have a sentence that say single family duplex, triplex of the same residential type.
Well,
It does not apply to.
you had a sentence in there that already, there was something you had there just was eliminated there. What was
All
the
residential used to have a type D rear and side yard buffer. Unless a different buffer is approved by the planning commission.
Can you
Wait,
change imposed to?
what are you doing there? Wait, you're adding more than you need. Shall have a rear and side unless a different buffer requirement is imposed by the planning commission. That gives you enough. The planning commission could impose a no buffer at all. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, they could eliminate, or
Yeah.
if there's something was weird, they could make it.
I think if you just yeah, and where an adjoining uses other than that.
So you're gonna default to the heavy buffer unless they're just doing something, that
Yeah,
of equivalent that doesn't require that. much
Right.
buffer.
From this, apply this to the housing over there that we just got done doing on Allison Road, how would it apply to the houses?
well, I think
Here on the-
I guess what Kim was saying there is because we have, unless a different buffer requirement is imposed, we could have taken it down to 0. Right? Because it's townhomes next to single family. Or we could just say, because it's a different residential type, it requires the type D.
Yeah, or we could do anything in between that.
That's right,
Right.
that's
A,
right.
B, or a
Right,
A, or
right.
whatever.
So in that case, using this, we could have made them a D,
Yeah,
put a D in or zero, or no
yeah, if
letter.
they'd agreed, okay, we'll stage, stage it up, you might have narrowed the buffer.
Exactly, okay.
Yes.
So now we had something to protect those folks over,
That's
okay.
I
So
think
do we
that-
still need to have the chart at all?
I get rid of the chart.
I get it.
Yeah, I think delete. After all that work.
Do we also add the sentence about duplex or?
Single family.
Yeah.
Well, again, I think that's the discretion of the planning commission.
But what if it doesn't come before the planning commission?
Well, then they have
Would
to,
it come to the planning?
well, then they can come to
Let's
us.
be like minor subdivisions at this point.
Ask for forgiveness.
I don't think
We- This will, that shall have a.
we wouldn't, you wouldn't trigger all this stuff for minor subdivision.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I see what you're saying, because we don't want 50-foot buffers between, or 30-foot buffers between. Subdivision. Although they probably don't climb. All right, well, if everybody's okay with that.
Okay, what's your next one?
I think we're good. I think we did some important work here today.
Build back.
All right, just to follow, okay.
I have another question. What if it's a multi-family across the street from a single family?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good.
Oh,
Well, we could say adjoining or, across the street from.
I think if you just said adjacent, that would cover being across the street.
Yeah, that's true.
Not abutting,
Joining or
but
adjacent.
Well, if it's across, cause I'm gonna say they're gonna, cause we didn't provide for every street.
right.
Yeah, so that's,
I would
yeah,
not use the word abut.
Yeah, that's a
I
good
would-
point
I would
there.
use adjacent.
that's a good point.
You mean, what about adjoining?
Well,
Yes.
Down in the green, we're using adjoining.
Yeah, I think adjacent.
Adjacent might be a little more flexible for what Benji's saying.
Adjoining is.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
uh,
bet, yeah,
Adjacent could be.
right
Yeah.
across the street and stuff, so
yeah.
that makes sense.
Interfere with Jason.
It does.
it should be adjacent to, yeah.
You guys are not getting to the point where we're going across roads, right? You're just adjacent to the property.
Well, adjacent would be, could be construed to be across the street.
So
Yes.
do we get rid of rear and side or?
You want that flexibility?
Was that Benji?
Is that-
If we're saying adjacent and then we're specifying rear and side when we're adding a front,
Yeah, that's
Do we
kind
just
of-
get
Yeah, this is only side and rear buffer,
That's
I
right,
think adjoining would.
but do we
Yeah,
want
if-
to be able to put?
that's right, we gotta keep it, we gotta remember we're talking.
Yeah,
about
yeah, we're talking-
side.
But going back to that question though, when we're talking about buffer requirements, when there's a development across the street from single family. Do we want to address that we
Well-
don't require?
Well, think about it just for a second, because we still have, first of all, we've got the separation, which is what a buffer is, because we at least have the distance of the right of way. Which is gonna be probably a minimum of 30 feet, might be more, but it's gonna be a minimum of 30. And do we also have elsewhere in this regulation a street tree requirement? Because that apartment development might have a requirement for street trees, even that are different than the code requirements, so we
Well,
might be
that's-
getting some stuff in there.
Yeah, I would have street trees, yeah.
So I think that might be enough, the right of way and the street trees.
I had like a height transition standard in the
Oh,
height
yeah.
section of the code to kind of deal with apartments slash. So. If that's, everybody's okay with this, I think we will try to button this up tomorrow and send copy to you tomorrow. It'll be obviously very late, but you're obviously want to get, right, that's the whole benefit of this. And then the city council's here in the chapter 7 and 9 tomorrow as well.
I was gonna go ahead and probably come to that with you.
Yeah.
Good. They may wanna have some explanation. Nine.
Not gonna do
Nine.
the job, right?
No, they're not doing the chapter.
Doing
They're
that.
not doing the HRBs.
So they're just gonna, just to be clear, they're gonna take out there's just two sections, 9, I think, 10 and 9/11. They take that out of 9,
9.10 is just left as it is now.
okay. They're not repassing, they're just.
But you're gonna give a little progress report as to why that's
Yeah.
not being included in.
When we encourage, we can let them know what's going on. Do you have anything else on your agenda, Kurt?
We talked about it for next week, we'll send this tomorrow, annexation. This, that will hope you can maybe improve, if not, you wanna make changes, that's fine, by the meeting, but we can make changes in the meeting. And then we'll send the chapter 8 off.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about it, we don't have to.
We have time to send you one copy. That would be.
So.
And Julia, Julia will get you.
Yes.
Do you have, did you keep a list of your parking lot issues?
Yeah, we talked.
You got,
about
covered them all?
Who's got the list? It's
it.
her.
What list are you?
When going through the draft, some things were put in the parking lot to like come back later.
Oh, you mean that part? Well, it was the buffer and it was parking, it was parking.
Clear
the
cutting
parking lot,
was one,
clear cutting.
annexation.
Tree standards, and so you have a specific tree, these, the.
Did you ever come back to mitigation? Like. or-
Mitigation was added into it, the
Not
definition.
mitigation pruning, the fees.
Oh, the fees?
Yeah, I mean, we did not go with your food. If that's what you're asking.
I thought that was one of the conversations that was put in the parking lot. And
It may have, but I guess I didn't write that down, but. Well, we talked about it a lot.
I nominate Christopher to keep the parking lot.
Well, why don't you guys review what might be in the parking lot and.
Well, I think we reviewed everything.
No, I mean, just in case, just double check and see, and then if there's something that we park that we need to discuss, we can talk about it at our meeting.
Well, I think what she's asking is the mitigation cost. I thought we had kind of talked about, but I don't think she thinks that, but.
I
Well,
don't remember talking about
we
it.
can be covered.
But she's right, she recommended that we took her draft, which is, you know, she made some changes, remember, like months ago. And she had changed this to 500, that's why it's showing up at 500. Which is dramatically more than it was. We've knocked it back down to 200 and 100 per inch. And 250 and 125 for convention.
So do you have a sense, Kurt, from the city council, where they're at on these?
They're at those two numbers.
Okay.
So,
Why did they, how have they brought that up to you? Just curious.
well, when we were doing the code edit sessions, you know, the $500 is the Port Royal. So, I don't know if they still have that. And there was concern that was way too high.
I think it should be 1,000.
But this is still much higher than.
With the wall or without?
Isn't it?
that's what it
So,
is.
No, is that what it is?
so
No, currently.
all trees, other than landmark and specimen trees, there's no fine.
My understanding of the concern was the single
Let's
family
go.
exemption, like the single family residences, not for
Which we are.
large developments. You know, I've never heard council express a concern over large developers being charged more. I've only heard them express a concern over single family.
So if we did double,
Do we accept the single family?
it's $150. Just double.
Well, I think that Benji's point is good. If you're not gonna charge single family homeowners these fees, they should be specifically exempted.
Yeah, they are.
Okay,
We
So
think
this is,
that.
Which is really too bad, because if a single family homeowner decides they want to chop down a 40-inch live oak, you know, I mean, that's. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
Is that right? We don't have any,
We exempted them in our last week.
so we've exempted them from any penalty for cutting down on.
I remember this conversation. I kind of remember
That's
the
right.
conversation.
Yeah. But,
I mean, if you wanna try that, I would, no one's gonna do that. Just a crazy person might do it. Yeah, somebody.
Well, or somebody, somebody who doesn't know,
Is that what
you
you're
know,
saying?
somebody who wants to, build a gazebo where the live oak is, and she's from some other place that doesn't protect trees.
I think the
And she's
thing
old.
that hasn't been discussed so much is that we're now making it really clear that we can turn down the tree requests. And we're doing that. We're turning them down, unless you can provide a really good reason, and then if we turn it down,
I don't see a problem with that.
if we turn it down, then
Because you
what,
don't have to impose it.
what are we getting by charging a person like 40, like 20 or $30,000? You know what I mean? What's the purpose of that?
My argument is that developers factor it into the cost of doing business, and if it's. They're gonna be taking down trees, they're looking at how much it's gonna cost, if it's a higher cost, if it's higher. There's more incentive for them to think more critically about how to design their.
So right now, what we do is we say. A developer, is what we're talking about. If you cut a tree down without a permit. You're got a 2-year moratorium, and then there's another provision, it could be up to 5 years. But if they're in no hurry, they do that, and then they pay for next to no penalty on top of that, right? And so there may be some people that just say, I'm gonna do that because I'm gonna just wait around because the financial cost is like negligible, right? And I think that's what Jesse's getting at partly, right? That's,
So
We're
what,
doubling it, so I mean, that's.
what are the, I can't see, my eyes aren't good enough. What are the fees we're charging now?
It's $100 and $50. Now we're going up to 200 and 100.
What do you think?
250 and 125.
I think there ought to be a distinction between types of trees. I mean, I
Yeah.
just don't have a problem.
Well, it's
Notwithstanding what
specimen.
Michael says, and I get it about the canopy, I really understand that now, but there's a big difference between a laurel oak and a live oak.
when it comes down to
Particularly
cutting
when it
some,
comes to a specimen, and a big magnolia.
well, especially when it comes to cutting it without a permit, which is what we're
Absolutely.
talking about, right?
So a live oak on this would be $200 an inch, and if it's a laurel oak or a water oak, it's $0.
What is?
Well, no, if it's a landmark water oak, which is
It's
24
not on the
inches.
list. Water oak's not on
It's
the
like a
list.
magnolia.
Laurel,
Okay,
laurel, be a specimen,
we're including laurel as a specimen.
but not landmark.
Yeah, well, excuse me, maybe it's not landmark, but it is specimen. And I think it's a specimen at 24 inches, as I recall. So I mean,
So that's $100.
all I'm saying is that I think that the trees that the community is most concerned with protecting are absolutely the live oaks, the big magnolias, and perhaps some of the others. But less so, I don't think the public in general, notwithstanding the tree canopy requirements. I'm not suggesting that we cut down all the trees, but there ought to be some reasonable mitigation for the less desirable species if if there can be some mitigation factor, that's all.
So when you say 25% replacement, what does that exactly mean? You have to find a tree that's 25% as big as the one you cut down, or?
So if you cut down a 20-inch live oak, you would have to replace, or not live oak, but a 20-inch tree. You'd have to replant 5 inches to work with that same species.
It has to be 5 inches at the time you plant it, or can
I
you plant a baby and know that it's gonna?
No, it's at the
I
time.
think it's at the time.
Or is it 2.5 inch?
You could, I think it lets you
Yeah.
do, as long as you reach the
Yeah,
flag
the
total.
number of inches.
So you could put 2.5 inches as opposed to 1.
As a
5 inch.
mitigation in place of a what did you
Yeah, are
say?
these alternatives or are these, or do both get imposed?
No, it's one or the other, so they can either replant or take the fee. As
Well,
of
so
current.
there's a thing, so the fee should at least be equal to the cost of the tree that you'd otherwise to be put in, so.
Certainly.
And I don't know that you can buy a. So just look at that cause $100 and or the caliper, what's that?
Caliper inch, that's the cost is.
Yeah,
per
I know, but
caliper.
just compare the cost to that, I can't see what the number is, what's the number in there?
$350 to plant a 2.5 inch.
Yeah, so if at $350, if it costs $350, today's dollars to replace or if that's the cost of what did you say, a 2.5 inch caliber tree, it shouldn't be any less than the cost of a 2.5 inch caliber tree. See what I'm saying? Otherwise, they'll always go for the dollars.
Port Royals is 500 and 250, if that is helpful.
So if you got $350 for a 2.5 inch caliper tree, my math is not fast. How much is that per minute?
$175.
And then labor. Plant the tree.
So
Yeah,
that's
that's the other
actually,
thing.
That's installed, no, that's an install.
That's an install price.
so that's less than what we're charging.
Yeah, you can't,
So,
you can't
I
have,
mean,
you can't have.
If you all want to increase it, that's fine.
But then you gotta have a place to plant them. And a lot of people don't have a place to plant them, so they're just gonna pay the fee.
Cause you have to plant them someplace where they're gonna have enough room to grow. You can't just plant them anywhere.
But what if we?
I mean, I think to Jesse's defense is, I think you're right. We were talking about lower, not going forward, because it was affecting single family lots, but. You know, developers aren't too thrilled about it either, right, because that's a big fee, so. But. So
What if
maybe
we go-
we could go a little higher.
What if we go with a compromise of 200 and 300?
Yeah, but I'm just saying doesn't it have to minimally be that you can't pay less than the cost of the tree?
Yeah.
So if anything, the dollars should be higher than the cost of the tree.
So we're probably like a little, for the transect zones, we probably should come up with it, and maybe the conventional.
And that ought to be the recommendation, if city council doesn't
so
want
maybe
to adopt
300
that, that's
and
the city
200.
council.
So
Let's
maybe,
just put 300 and 200 for both of them.
yeah, but wait a second, Paul, let's just try to make it a rational thing. If the 2.5 inch tree costs $350, then our numbers should be more than
Well,
$350.
it would be at three
Is
hundred.
it?
Well, it'd be
Yes.
$175 an inch, so if we put
Okay.
$300, it's almost double, so we
Okay,
could
as long as
$350.
As long as it's
We could
more
put
than the cost of the
350 for
tree.
both, 350 and like 225 or something.
It's $140 an inch. That's what a 2.5 inch caliper tree at $350 is, $140 an inch.
But we're not letting somebody plant less than, there's gotta be a minimum tree caliper that we require.
2.5 is.
So 2.5 times whatever what's that dollar then? And that's in today's dollars.
He said $140.
Well, that's what it is,
So 140 times 2.5. And then up it a little bit. Is that what
And
you're
we
saying?
probably have to plant it.
I'd go 200 and 300.
Yeah, but that doesn't, but I just think it should be, it has to be more than the cost of it.
That is more.
It is.
200, you're saying 200 an inch.
Yes.
Okay, that,
Yes, 200.
So you wanna go 300 and 200?
So they can,
Yes.
yeah, they can plant a tree, let's just say for $150 an inch.
And why is conventional less than?
I think I was.
The point is that it's
Single words, because I know that building-
the minimum number of inches
Yeah.
is discouraged. It has to have a. As long as there's a minimum number of inches, like 2.5, 20, 140 times 40.
What's the justification for having different?
You have to do that.
No, I mean for a single family.
I'm not sure.
I think
I know in the current.
So here's the only point, it has to be, if the minimum tree caliper is 2.5 inches, then if it's 100, whatever the dollar is, it's gotta be times 2.5, because that's gotta be the minimum amount. It can't be a dollar amount that's a minimum less than the 2.5 inch
That's-
So
caliper.
it's 140 times 2.5,
There.
would be
$350.
350. let's do 350.
There you go.
And the fine,
That would be the,
so.
and then we have an explanation, and then you probably need to raise the specimen tree up to like 250 then. Yes.
Why are the numbers different in the transect zones and the
Well,
conventional?
those numbers,
Well, because the code is always trying to benefit the form-based districts. In every aspect, it's trying to encourage you to do a form-based development.
What does that have to do with tree mitigation?
Because it's allowing you to come, not have as much open space.
And you'll have less parking.
You'll have less. Where you go to 500.
We want to keep them the same.
Yeah, I think we might as well.
Part of the whole point of this was, we didn't want clear cutting. Or whatever the other word is.
That's really.
Unpermitted tree.
That's what it's.
So if they come in and do this, and they cut it without
Well, that's why.
having the tree survey done,
I get it.
then we have
Highlight
to be
how
able to
awesome
enforce our guys going out and doing the tree survey on everything that's cut and charging them.
You know, I
We
think
gotta
what
have
we should
some
do is we should
incentive.
penalize them for the cost of us doing the tree survey over and above.
Especially if you wanna run in a tree city.
Did you hear that, Kurt? There was so many conversations going on. I was suggesting that if they don't do the tree survey and they cut things down unpermitted, then in order to charge them, we have to do a tree survey at the city's expense, and I think that that should be an additional
Yeah.
charge to these
Yeah.
scofflaws that are cutting the trees without permit.
Cause that could be expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And also.
and it's staff and, you'd like to be able to hire somebody to do it instead of making Nick and Christopher do it, I mean,
Working, it does the work.
right, and he has to be paid.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Now, we're gonna hire somebody really mean from California to come do it.
Can we put that in, can you put a note, Christopher, that we wanna add that to the penalties for unpermitted trees?
Because they're all tree huggers.
What? I think so, I mean, you're gonna charge the mitigation cost plus the cost of doing the survey.
Additional fees may be charged for clear cutting. How's that?
No, or
Or for-
unpermitted tree removal,
Unpermitted tree, additional fees including
cost of survey.
recapture of costs of the.
Yeah, you got cost of survey, other city costs.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
Including tree survey and
right.
arborist fees, et cetera.
The plane ticket from
DNA tree
California.
testing. Is it a live oak or a laurel? Okay.
Hotel.
Yeah, there you go. That solves the problem.
Okay.
Actually, really held it. Cost of tree survey,
I would say recapture
cost of
of city costs, including tree surveys and arborist fees. Including but not limited to.
That's it, that's the
Yeah, that's
language,
the language.
contract language.
Cause I mean, how do you definitively establish that the stump belongs to a live oak versus a water oak?
Murphy could tell you.
That's
Yeah.
the argument.
That's why we-
If
that's
you
why-
have to do some
they're not gonna have
testing,
to
I'm
us.
wondering if there might be like,
All right.
kind
I think you could.
of, it's okay.
Do we have anybody online for questions?
No, but we
No.
did get one like on Facebook.
Doing something right.
That's right, our banter.
Was there just one person watching us on?
There's a handful, normally even for the big ticket stuff, there's not a ton of people in the moment, but you can see they constantly go back, cause they'll have 1,000, 2,000 views within a month, 2 months, so. Yeah, but one like and subscribe.
That was my wife.
See when we're coming home.
So.
Jesse, you got anything?
Work, so I think I'll drive towards the 5 o'clock hour.
Yeah, we could do it at the, we can put the scheduling of the work session at the meeting as a agenda. item.
You got another couple of bucks out of us.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you thought of that, because we,
Yeah,
that was
I
important, that we,
agree.
you know, we just
I agree.
missed that.
Well, if that's it, I'll call us adjourned.
All right.
Done.